Hello everyone, welcome to What If Issei Lost the War of Qulippoth and Become the King of Darkness Part 1. Before we start, please go support the Salryper 301 for writing that awesome fanfic. This is the translated version I made. There will be some wrong he or she calling here because it's translated, so let me clear this. Issei is a male in this story. Chapter 1. Darkness and Light. Issei's POV. It's funny and ironic, you know, after a long but great battle and having lost trillions of times, being on the verge of death more than once, I won and then fell from thousands of meters high. That being my possible death. But at first it wasn't like this, and I wasn't something like this, a completely dark being. Before I wasn't capable of hurting or wishing harm on someone, but now, it filled me with satisfaction to see someone begging for their life or agonizing as they slowly died. My family weren't nice to me, but they weren't mean to me either. None of them dared to touch a hair on my head when I was a child. They just pushed me aside as if it wasn't important. However, the only one who didn't do that was my older brother Aaron. He always supported me in everything and found a way to cheer me up when I was sad. I had no one besides him, since it was very difficult for me to make friends, especially being the son of a demon clan. My father is Aiden Haidu, a human who was reincarnated as a devil a long time ago. He told my brothers and me how he did thousands and thousands of jobs and showed incredible power in them until after a while he became a high-class devil. Then, my mother is Amelia Haidu, who was a former student of the wizard Merlin, then stopped being one and was reincarnated by my father as his queen Peace and then made his wife. However, these two were not as demonic as they believed, since it seems that both of them still kept a small human essence within themselves. And because of that, my brothers and I were born with sacred gears, or rather, devices or gifts that the biblical God granted to humans to defend themselves from the supernatural. Aaron, for his part, possesses a somewhat rare sacred gear, being nothing more than a simple grimoire with which he can summon, learn and even create spells never seen before. Although he showed some spells that could be learned in any magic book, but there were other spells that were not found in any modern magic book. Then comes Daniel, my other older brother, who possesses a bow with the power to use and control the 4 types of elemental magic. He could even combine them to make another type of element. And last but not least, my older sister Adeline, who is the possessor of the boosted gear, a Longinus type sacred gear with the ability to double the power of its wearer for 10 seconds, in addition to being able to transfer power to someone or even an object. But if that were not enough, within the boosted gear lives the soul of a mythical being none other than the celestial dragon of domination himself, Drake Gotch. Note. Aaron is 5 years older than Issei, while Daniel is 3 years older than Issei, and 2 years older than Adeline. For example, if Issei is 15 years old, Aaron would be 20, Daniel 18, and Adeline 17. I explain this so that you don't have any difficulties regarding the ages of these 4, end of note. For my part, I do not have a great sacred gear like my brothers, being nothing more than a simple dagger with 5 holes in the blade. But of course, it goes without saying that our parents put us through training, helping us in the process by teaching us different things. From the control of our sacred gears, the close and long-range combat classes to the principles and handling of magic. For 2 whole months we have been trained by them. My brothers achieved great results having talent for battles. However, I was the opposite case. Of all that my parents taught me, I managed to learn almost nothing. And so as not to be a hindrance in my brother's training, I was sent back to the Haidu mansion under the care of Cecilio, a butler who my father completely trusted, as well as being one of his friends. After that day, time continued to pass normally, and in order not to be in the mansion doing nothing, Cecilio hired a private teacher from the underworld who had given me different classes. Among them was the history of the supernatural world, but more of demons and humans. After all, it had a small but significant human part for me. When the professor left, he would leave me with large amounts of homework, which I managed to finish with the help of Cecilio and 1 or 2 servants from the mansion. At night when I went to sleep, Aaron Nai would contact me to find out what I was doing in the mansion. I only told him what the teacher Cecilio hired taught me or what homework I left, which made Nai-san happy to know that I wasn't lazy, although he promised me that when he finished his training, he would help me become very strong like him, which made me very excited, wanting that day to come. However, before I knew it, I was already 14 years old, which surprised me greatly, since I had not expected time to pass so quickly. Although from what I could remember, my parents had trained my brothers for about 8 years and had only returned a few days ago. Well, I had finished all the classes of that teacher that Cecilio hired 2 years ago, and as if that were not enough, I went to an elementary school in the human world, having finished with the best grades and also being in the 1st grade of the academy. But when I met up with my siblings, I could sense that the 3 of them had become incredibly powerful, but Adeline and Daniel, while Aaron and I weren't on the level of the 2 of them, but their power undoubtedly surpassed that of a high-class devil. Although, to my surprise, I found out that they had received their evil pieces so that they could reincarnate anyone of any race into a demon. Well, I didn't even have that privilege, although in part I didn't care since I didn't like having someone as my slave. However, it was not surprising or strange. The reason I say that is simple. Adeline and Daniel were the same, or perhaps much more arrogant and egocentric than the heirs or heiresses of several demonic houses. They both boasted about the power they had gained from entering these 8 years. They even made a demonstration of their powers using their balance breakers. I would lie that most of the demons were envious of Adeline and Daniel. But if we talk about Aaron Nai, he was completely different from the demons, my brothers and even my parents. He was very calm, kind and caring with anyone. He even kept his promise to train me once he returned, which made me very happy and excited. Aaron Nai trained me inside an alternate dimension of a coliseum. It was very hard and strict, but I knew he did it, so I could try my best and give my best. When our training was over, he would take me for a walk around the city of Lilith to spend time with me. But as for my parents, I didn't need the power or magic to read minds to know what they think of me. Just by feeling those eyes of total disappointment fixed on me, I realized what they were thinking. They were disappointed not to have another talented son or one with potential to polish when it comes to battles. After all, I heard that I was the shame and dishonor of the Haidu family, someone who should not be called or considered a demon. For my part, that hurt me, but it also made me angry, since they were practically saying that the weak are not allowed among the demons, that without having talent, power or anything that has to do with battles, you are only considered lower level trash. But I had to put up with all that feeling to avoid causing trouble. Although, apparently I wasn't the only one who went to the academy in the human world, since Adeline and Daniel went to the same academy as me, but Adeline went to 2nd grade and Daniel to 3rd grade, while Aaron Nai went to the same university. However, it was in that same academy where I met my one Sans. Each of them were good and kind in their own way. They were none other than Ria's Gremory, the heiress of the Gremory clan, along with the girls in her entourage. I got along very well with them, even with their knight Udo Kiba, who I consider a great friend, as well as the heir of the Bale clan, Saraerg Bale-san. In short, they, apart from Aaron Nai and Saraerg-san, were like my greatest idols to follow, giving me the motivation to become stronger and stronger. As time went by and the adventures we had many enemies, but just as we made enemies, we also made allies. One of them being the Volley Lucifer team, the current hacker Yuiku and rival of Adeline, and we have even managed to make the Heroes faction become our allies, leaving aside our differences and conflicts. Although, in order not to fall behind and be a hindrance, I tried twice as hard, whether on the battlefield or in the training camp. I had no plans to just stand by and watch while others fought. And for that reason, I asked Aaron Nai and Saraerg-san to be more strict with me and my training plans, which they both accepted with a proud smile on their faces. They helped me with the magic and physical exercises, and they also taught me how to fight hand to hand using my fists or my sacred gear. But speaking of it, after a long time I understood how it works, being a technique called full counter, which allows me to reflect or return my enemy's magical attacks with twice the power. Something similar to Tsubaki Ni's sacred gear called the Mirror of Memory, but with notable and big differences, although it does not change the fact that her sacred gear and mine reflect the magical power of our enemies. But apart from the full counter, thanks to a tip from Saraerg-san, who out of curiosity told me why I didn't apply magic power in the halls, and seeing that I didn't lose anything, I did it, but nothing happened. However, when I shook my sacred gear I felt like half of my magic power had vanished. Although for some reason Aaron Nai and Saraerg-san seemed surprised by something as I looked around, there being an exact copy of myself in front of me. At first it had been difficult to convince Aaron Nai that I was the real Issei, as well as making my clone disappear. After that, I applied magic again to the holes in my sword and slashed the air, causing 4 physical clones of myself to appear, although in doing so my magic power had decreased, and at that very moment I realized that my clones retained a fraction of my power. So looking at it another way, I called that technique physical clones. After all, that's what they were, physical clones of myself. And thanks to Aaron Nai and Saraerg-san who helped me in my training, I became strong enough to fight and protect those I considered valuable. But after several long months full of battles, deaths and destruction, we had managed to finish off Risivam Lucifer along with his organization, in addition to sealing the Trihexa, without the need for someone to sacrifice themselves to seal it. We had won and survived our possible extinction. Of course, a few days later there was a funeral for the soldiers who died in battle. But a few weeks later, the leaders had a party at the Lucifer mansion to celebrate Qulippoth's fallen defeat. That day, men and women, boys and girls alike drank and partied to the max. There was a huge atmosphere full of joy and fun. Although I suppose that was normal. I mean, after all, we were about to be destroyed if the Trihexa was gone. What would have happened if we hadn't sealed it? However, the party was stopped by the Mao Lucifer Search's Gremory, who apologized for interrupting the party, but the reason why he did that is simple. He did it to give news being nothing more than my exile from the Haidu clan and from the underworld itself. I didn't know what to say. At that moment, I thought it was all a joke and bad taste and that they were playing with me. But it wasn't like that. The elders of the demonic council and the Haidu patriarchs agreed on my exile. However, they were not the only ones, as Daniel and Adeline did, as did almost the vast majority of those who were at that party, who raised their hands for me to be exiled. Even my one Sans, the girls I admired so much and did everything to make them proud of me, also accepted my exile. Everyone at the party told me I was a weakling, a coward, and that I just ran away like a little girl the moment I saw the Trahixa, and many other things. I wanted to prove that what they were saying wasn't true, I wanted to make them swallow their own words. But I didn't know what to do, I just wanted to cry. My own race, my own friends, even my own family were turning their backs on me. Unable to bear it any longer, I left the party crying. I couldn't stand being in there for another second. As I walked out, I could hear the laughter of each and every one of them, but I ignored that and went to a lake where Aaron Nye and I went from time to time to fish. But at that moment I realized something. I had remembered that Aaron Nye and Serergsan were not at the party, and I was pretty sure that those two didn't know anything about my exile. I was going to go with them, but then I thought about it and decided not to, because if I did I would only be giving reason to all the demons who were at the party that I was a coward who couldn't fix things on my own and needed to turn to someone strong. So I stood there, staring at my reflection in the water as my teardrops fell into the lake. However, when I least expected it, Cecilio had sat down next to me, which surprised me to see him, since I didn't know he knew that place. Cecilio began to talk to me about my exile, giving me various tips on how I could survive alone in the human world without anyone's help. I only paid attention to what he said, after all he was someone who gave very good advice, which was very helpful at the right times. However, at that moment I was wondering how he knew about the lake and the path I had to take to get there. How did he know about my exile? The lake was surrounded by an illusory barrier that Aaron Nye had made, and he and I were the only ones who knew about the lake and the path to take. Also, Cecilio wasn't at the party and he didn't go with us either, but the way he spoke made him say it, as if he had seen everything firsthand. Of course I let him finish, after all I had been taught that it was bad to interrupt people when they were speaking. When he finished speaking I asked him how he knew about my exile. But he didn't answer me. I was going to ask him back, thinking that he didn't hear me or understand me, but when I was going to do so I felt like something had stung my neck. I just touched the spot where I got the itch, but I felt something big stuck to my neck, so I removed it feeling a little pain when I did so. But when I did, I saw that it was a small dart. However, I was beginning to feel dizzy and weak and then fell to the ground. As I slowly closed my eyes, I managed to see how Cecilio had formed a mocking and evil smile on his face, and then everything went dark for me. I had no idea how long I was asleep, whether it was a few hours or maybe a day. But the moment I woke up, I found myself in a cell, shackled by shackles, which I tried to break, but I couldn't. However, I could notice how someone had approached my cell, so I turned my sight towards that person, being none other than Cecilio, who looked at me as if a lion was watching its prey, but as if it were a damned illusion. Behind Cecilio was none other than Ricivam Livan Lucifer himself. Of course I thought it was my imagination playing tricks on me, after all I myself witnessed how Ricivam had been killed by the Trahixa. But when I saw him again, I realized that it was Ricivam himself, alive and kicking, who looked at me with an air of superiority, with much hatred and resentment. For my part, I didn't know what to do. I was afraid of what Ricivam or Cecilio could do to me, whether I would escape alive or not from their clutches. I couldn't do anything, all I could do was ask for help in my head from anyone. I didn't care if it was my parents, my brothers, my one Sans. I didn't care who it was, I just wanted someone to get me out of that place and take me away from Ricivam. 3 years, I was with Ricivam for 3 whole years, my hopes of being rescued had vanished with the passage of time. Ricivam tortured me by wanting me to tell him all the information regarding the allied factions, the number of their troops, fortresses, everything. I didn't know anything about it, I basically just followed his orders and nothing else. With luck they let me participate in some meetings. I even told him, but he didn't believe me and continued torturing me until I became unconscious. Ricivam treated me like some kind of toy that he enjoyed hurting, willing to destroy each of its hopes, and guess what, he succeeded. Although that was to be expected after all, I had no one to save me, except for Aaron Nye or Serergsan, but with the 3 years that passed, I doubted that they would be able to find the base or fortress I was in. But if that were not enough, Ricivam made my tortures very personal because he had a deep hatred and resentment towards the Haidu family, but more towards my brothers for having interrupted his plans. And torturing someone with Haidu blood running through their veins like me was like pure ecstasy for him. However, Cecilio, that butler whom I trusted and cared for so much and even saw as my father for having raised me and supported me in many things, was graped by him repeatedly. The reason why he did that was to get revenge on my father who had apparently killed his younger sister and to obtain that revenge that he wanted so much. He chose me to pay for what my father had done, posing as a good butler, a friend and even my mother. Raping me alone, sometimes together with some guards or with Risivam himself. But when I wasn't being tortured or raped, I was forced to work in different places, from working in a mine to setting up camps or creating weapons for Risivam's troops. I only followed the orders they gave me. After all, I didn't have any kind of special power to free myself, and because of the shackles I always wore, they didn't let me use magic or release my sacred gear. I thought I would do that for the rest of my life, being a slave and at the same time being a toy to satisfy two old shits. Until one night everything changed and I met that old man. He was a very, very huge man who managed to reach the sky. He wore dark armor while on his back hung a slightly torn cape. He also had big horns and a white beard. He was surrounded by a completely dark and sinister aura, which made me tremble with fear. For a moment I thought it was a nightmare like any other until he told me the following. Flashback plus author Pav. Do you want to be able to, kid? He said, asked in a serious and dark tone, giving the brown-haired boy a chill that was not at all good. Issei. How do I know what you're saying is true? Are you real or just a product of my nightmare? He said, asked with a trembling tone, while the old man said nothing. That's up to you. If you accept, you'll have enough power to free yourself from that hell, but if you refuse, you'll only continue to be used by those two old men until they decide to get rid of you, he said in a serious tone, making Issei think about whether or not he should accept that power. Issei. Is this some kind of deception? A mere illusion? He said, asked somewhat seriously, looking at the old man, who just shook his head. There is no deception and no lies, child. It is not an illusion or a dream, he said in a firm tone, while Issei was hesitant between accepting the power that the old man wanted to give him or denying it directly until he made a decision. Issei. I accept that power. I want revenge, to skin the damned ones who touched me. I want to kill them with my own hands, watching them all die and painfully while they beg for their lives. I want to bathe in the blood of all of them until none are left alive, he said, while little by little he was raising his tone until he screamed full of hatred, with a desire for revenge, willing to kill Risivam, Cecilio and dismantle Qulippoth forever without leaving anyone alive. That's how you speak, kid. Here's your new power, he said in a somewhat proud tone, creating a sphere of a dark purple color. That sphere was sent to Issei, who didn't know what to do with it until the sphere entered his body and he began to feel an overwhelming, dark and completely evil power. While at that same moment, his hair had changed to a maroon color, ceasing to be brown, while the color of his eyes obtained a dark purple color, and along with that, a strange mark formed on his forehead. Issei's Pav. At that very moment I had woken up, feeling all that power inside me, but for some reason the soldiers who were at the base were beginning to move, nervous and afraid. But seeing that, I didn't think twice and proceeded to free myself from the shackles, something I achieved with great ease. After that, I decided to leave my cell, kicking open the door, causing it to crash into the wall in front of me. Before he even thought of running away, he had created a magical barrier to prevent anyone, including me, from using magic. After that, I proceeded to find Risivam and Cecilio to make them pay for everything they did to me. Although, I stopped to look at the other people who were prisoners, which made me smile unholy. Without wasting any time I freed all the prisoners who were in that base. Of course they tried to escape, but they only ended up dying at the hands of the guards. Of course, saving them wasn't my goal, rather my goal was to use them as bait to lure the guards into appearing so I could kill them. I didn't have anything against them, but they were so weak and exhausted that they would have surely died a few days after leaving the place, so I practically did them a favor by letting them die at the hands of the guards. Leaving that aside, it took me about 30 minutes or maybe less to finish off all the guards that were in that base. After that I headed to where Risivam and Cecilio were, who were in the same room. Although I was a little surprised not to see that his pupil and the incestuous Euclid Lucifuge was with him. But that was the least of my worries, so I could only focus on Risivam and Cecilio, ready to make them go through hell. Then flashback. After that day, I set out to dismantle Qulippoth once and for all, forever. Destroying his strongholds, killing and dismantling his troops, even eliminating the subjects who were attached to Qulippoth from the shadows, giving him income and his full cooperation, as well as his loyalty to Risivam. It took me about 2 weeks to do all that, and thanks to Risivam's cooperation and the files I had in his office, I managed to get rid of Qulippoth. Although when I refer to cooperation, I mean that I tortured Risivam with the same methods he tortured me with, but with the difference that I used holy water. Meanwhile with Cecilio, knowing that he liked to put his hock in holes, out of curiosity, I wanted to know if he liked it when someone put it in him. Of course I didn't grape him, I just put anything long and thick that I found at the base in his anal rectum or mouth, whether it was swords, spears, axes, etc. Until one day he asked me for mercy, telling me different types of forgiveness and that he was sorry for having graped me. He even told me that he considered me as his son even though I wasn't. When I heard that, I didn't think twice and I cut off his hock, making him choke on it, and I even made him eat it. To be honest, they were without a doubt the best weeks I've ever had in my entire life, although of course when I finished dismantling Qulippoth, neither of them were of any use to me anymore. But I needed something and that something was for them to beg for their lives. I wanted to see the fear in their eyes the moment I was about to kill them, and that's what I did. I left them alive for a few more days to make their hopes of being rescued fade away, to make them break down completely to the point of going mad. When I did, they both begged for mercy and for me to stop torturing them, something that gave me a satisfaction that to this day I could not explain. So I did it, I freed them from their torture by throwing a purple fire at them that came with the arsenal of power that the old man had given me. It was music to my ears to hear their screams of agony and pain as those flames consumed the skin and flesh of their bodies. After a few moments, Risivam and Cecilio were reduced to nothing but ashes, nothing left of them. After that, I proceeded to leave that place creating some wings made of dark matter, since my demon wings had been ripped off by Risivam, telling me that it was a complete dishonor that I had those wings, and he ripped them off. Which I regretted for not having done the same to him, but he was already dead so what's done is done. I just flew towards the nearest town or city or at least the first one I saw. I flew for about a few hours until I got to a city, but to avoid problems, I tried to look for something until I managed to find a blanket around there. I just put it on so that no one would see my clothes that were stained with blood. After that I moved around the city looking for a clothing store. Until I found it and without thinking twice I went in, grabbing all the clothes that were close to my size and then going to one of the dressing rooms. Although the moment I saw myself in the mirror, there was a strange mark on my forehead which emanated a lot of power, so I just concentrated to suppress all that power, although the only thing that happened was that mark disappeared from my forehead. When that happened, my eyes stopped being that dark purple color and became the same color as my hair, that is, maroon, and even when I should have looked like I was 18, I still looked like a 15-year-old teenager. Note. For those who don't know, maroon is the common name for colors that resemble those of dark red varieties that can be somewhat purplish, end note. But I didn't give much thought to that and tried to figure out what clothes fit me, choosing the ones that were a little big for me and then paying for them and leaving that city in search of a river to shower in. And luckily for me, I managed to find a river a few kilometers from that city. When I landed, I just threw the clothes I bought in there and then took off the rags I was wearing and jumped into the water. I spent about 20 minutes taking my time to get rid of all the blood I had on me. Once I finished showering and my body was dry, I got dressed and took out my wings to just go wherever the wind took me. I spent about 2.5 years going from one place to another, getting to know different cities, cultures and even trying delicious meals which I paid for with the money I had saved in a pocket dimension. However, I didn't just travel the world, but I also trained to control the power of darkness that I possessed, my sacred gear and magic. I knew I didn't need to do it after all, I was no longer united and I didn't care about the things that could be happening in the supernatural world. However, after a long time I got back in touch with that old man who had given me this power of darkness. At first we had a friendly conversation, thanking him for giving me the power I needed to free myself from the hell I was going through at the time. But as the minutes passed, that conversation gradually stopped being friendly and pleasant until the old man called out to me, saying, "I help you, and now you will help me by being my vessel so I can get out of this place." I was angry and upset. After all, he was right, he helped me get out of that hell, and now he wanted to get out of his own. But anyway, I refused. I wasn't going to let him take over my body, besides it was his fault, since at no time did he tell me or give me an indication that he wanted something when he offered me that power. But of course, the old man got very angry, imagined that I had refused my help, but a few minutes later he calmed down and then told me that he was in purgatory. Exactly, purgatory is a space between the world of the living and the other world, the damned limbo, and I knew very well why he told me that. After that I had woken up from that dream, but without wasting any time and without having hesitated for a second, I set out to find a way to go to purgatory. I had moved through almost the entire supernatural world, threatening any person, whether man or woman, who told me everything about purgatory and how to get there. However, they had no idea about purgatory and even told me that it did not exist, but that was stupid after all. The old man would not have told me that he was in purgatory if it did not exist. Being of no help to me, I killed the men while I let the women go. After all, I had nothing against them and they were completely honest with me. But unlike them, the men acted brave, and some even challenged me to a duel which barely lasted about 5 seconds. I had been doing that for a few months and hadn't found any information about purgatory and how to get there. I had no choice but to infiltrate Michael, Auden, Yasaka and Searches' offices to find out if any of them had files about purgatory in their offices. It was easy to get into their offices, but the hard part was looking for the files on purgatory, but none of the four had any files close to that. But I had one more place left, and that was Azazel's office, located in Grigori. However, I was lucky enough to find a kind of diary that recounted everything about purgatory, being a completely hostile place with a highly toxic environment, along with an infernal cold, as well as a small report on the different creatures that were in that place. But what caught my attention the most was that I could enter purgatory if I recited the words on the first page as a spell. I wasted no time and proceeded to leave Grigori, but before doing so I left a small gift for Azazel to give to Searches. Once I left Grigori, I went to a place where no one and nothing could interrupt me, to just start reciting the same words that were written on the first page of the diary. When I finished reciting all the words, a portal had opened in front of me. I didn't think twice and entered that portal. When I got to the other side I was in a completely rocky place, with huge amounts of rivers or pools of lava. I even began to feel my lungs swell, giving me hellish pain, and my skin burn just by feeling the cold in that place, and without a doubt, I realized that I was in purgatory. Having gathered all my strength, I proceeded to walk through the purgatory in search of the old man, going from one place to another. But while I was looking for him, along the way I was confronted by the creatures that were there, and sometimes I was unable to even move because of the atmosphere in the purgatory. However, I kept walking in search of the old man, but while I was doing that, I wondered what kind of power he had, if I had a chance to win or hurt him. But still, I was willing to face him one way or another. Although when I least expected it, I had already adapted to the environment of purgatory, no longer feeling that cold while breathing that toxic air as if it were oxygen. Until after a long time going from one place to another, I was able to find him, or rather he found me. There stood the old man. He looked exactly the same as I had seen him in my dreams, but as I felt his power, I realized that I had no chance at all. His power was far superior to mine, I couldn't even keep up with him. But I still activated my sacred gear and that mark to just throw myself at the old man. However, even though I wasn't even 50 meters away from him, he had been seriously injured by a single attack by the old man. As I said from the beginning, I have lost trillions and trillions of times against the old man who didn't even bother to take the fight seriously, he just played with me. I was basically just a weak little ant in front of a powerful and gigantic dragon. However, for nothing in the world and at no time did I give up. Every time I lost I increased my training more and more, making it very strict to the point that my bones felt like they were going to break, causing me muscle pain that was not at all nice, and I even managed to recreate the spells that Eren Nai created. In addition to training my sacred gear and the power of darkness like never before. And when I was fully recovered, I would return to the attack against the old man, lasting a little longer than the last times, but still losing. But as I became stronger, I began to understand how the power of darkness worked, which evolved leading me to have a power that I never thought I would have. Until one day I achieved a form which unleashed all the power of darkness, having reached immense power. That form I call Assault Mode. Obviously at first using Assault Mode left me very exhausted, not being able to use it a second time. But as time went by I perfected it to the point where I could keep it up for a long time, it didn't leave me exhausted, and I could activate it at will as many times as I wanted or at least needed. Although when I used it, for some reason I felt like I was losing something inside me, but I didn't know what, but whatever I lost ended up coming back after a long time. However, one day I managed to realize how and why the old man didn't seem to be affected by the attacks I had managed to inflict on him, whether through magic or even with my own sacred gear. Apparently he had a kind of power or magic which reversed all my attacks. That is, if I cast an attack spell on the old man and it hit him, instead of damaging or weakening him, he would be strengthened or healed, thanks to that magic or reversal power. It took me a while to realize that, but when I did, I knew that I could use that to my advantage to kill the old man. However, the old man was faster than me and realized that I knew about his magic. From then on he stopped being sweet and affectionate with me to only attack me to kill, no longer wanting to possess my body. But thanks to the exercises I did and the beatings the old man had given me, my body was able to survive the old man's deadly attacks, giving me the time I needed to run away and take time to rest and then return to attack the old man. However, I had already grown tired of being beaten by the old man, and instead of attacking him as usual, I decided to create different strategies ready to kill him. I had created 3 long and difficult plans, using everything I could from my magic to the creatures of purgatory. I had put the first plan into action and it went well at first, but if it weren't for the assault mode that had been disabled, I might have had a chance to win, but oh well. It took me a few seconds to activate it again, but those seconds were enough for the old man to cut me in half. But thanks to the healing factor of the dark matter I managed to survive, and without wasting time I had left the place of the fight. Then I tried to put the second plan into action, but the old man was so furious and irritated that he didn't let me do it, willing to kill me once and for all. However, I had managed to survive on my ass because if I had been with him for a few more seconds, I wouldn't be telling this story now. Although when I returned I was ready and prepared to put plan 3 into action. I was surprised to find that the old man was exhausted, and it was probably because he had used all his power when he tried to kill me, since due to the fury he felt at that moment, he wasn't aiming very well. But anyway, I used that to my advantage, noticing that the old man's movements weren't the same as when he was in shape. Plan 3 was a complete success. I was seriously injured, but unlike the old man, he was literally in pieces. I was ready to kill him, but before I did, he forced me to let him live, since being the king of purgatory, it could end up sinking into chaos and destruction. Of course, that surprised me when I learned that he was the king of purgatory, but in one swift and clean cut, I cut his neck. A strange purple smoke came out of the old man, which had expanded throughout purgatory, while his body became smaller and smaller, until it was the same height as an ordinary old man. Seeing that my objective was already accomplished, I took out that diary and proceeded to recite the words, recreating the portal I used to enter purgatory. But this time, I was willing to use it to leave, since I had nothing to do in that place. When I returned to the human world, I appeared somewhere in the world, but I didn't know where. I was just going to head to a city to rest. However, before I could do anything, the assault mode had deactivated while I began to fall from the sky. Right now, I'm completely exhausted. I used every drop of my power to kill that old man. The damage he caused me has been healed, but the damage still remains. But as I close my eyes, I would have liked to say goodbye to Aaron Nye. Elsewhere plus, authors Pav. We found ourselves in a forest at the place. It was full of snow after all it was the winter season, but in this forest, we could see a somewhat large and traditional house, like the ones that were in the Edo era, a few meters away from the house a hut in which the sound of some knocks could be heard. But we will focus on the house, in which there was a young woman around 26 years old, with a fair complexion, and having her hair tied back in a messy bun, but with some loose black strands hanging from her beautiful face. The color of her eyes is a dark purple, although she seemed to have a lighter color at the edge of the iris, in addition to having a small mole under her lower left lip. The woman was making a meat and vegetable soup while humming a song. She stopped humming when she heard someone close the door of the house. A few moments later, a man of about 45 years old with long black hair and purple eyes entered the kitchen, having left an axe leaning against a wall, and carrying some logs of firewood under his left arm. "Here you go, Kai," he said in a somewhat tired tone, while leaving the logs of firewood near the woman. "Hi. Thank you very much Otu-san," he said with a grateful tone, grabbing some logs and putting them on the fire, while Ain sat near a table in the kitchen. "Sai, how is that child? Did he give any indication that he is going to wake up?" he said, remembering how his daughter found an unconscious boy in the forest, inside a crater and being covered by snow. "Hi. He has a high fever and no, he didn't give any indication that he was going to wake up soon," she said with a sad tone and full of pity for the boy, who apart from his fever was very hurt. "Although I still wonder what caused that crater," he said in a somewhat serious tone, thinking that that boy was not human. "Hi. Me too, here you go Otu-san, have a good meal," he said in a somewhat respectful tone, giving her a bowl of soup. "I appreciate it, daughter," she said in a grateful tone, proceeding to eat what her daughter prepared. "Hi. I'll be back, I'm going to check on him," she said, grabbing a bowl of hot water and heading towards the room where the boy was. "Okay, but first take the axe with you," he said as he grabbed the axe that was near him, wanting to give it to his daughter. "Otu-san, he's just a child and he's very weak. I'm not going to use an axe against him and make him think I'm going to hurt him," she said in an annoyed tone, since her father was very overprotective and even more so when it came to children. "What? It's just for safety," he said in a somewhat carefree tone, while Kai didn't say anything and left the kitchen. "Heavens, it's just like mother," he said with a nostalgic and sad tone, while he left the axe near him just in case. Meanwhile with Kai, she just headed towards the room where that boy was until she arrived, opening the door and revealing an Issei lying on a futon, wearing a wet cloth on his forehead. Kai, for her part, approached Issei, leaving the bowl of hot water near her and removing the cloth that Issei had on his forehead. The woman dipped the cloth in the hot water and then rolled the cloth until it was wet and put it back on the boy's forehead. "Hi. I still wonder how this could happen to you," Kitty said sadly, feeling sorry knowing the bad condition Issei's body was in. She just let out a small sigh to proceed to leave the room, but before getting up she noticed how Issei was showing signs of waking up. "Hi. Otu-san, I need you to come, he's waking up," she exclaimed alarmed from the room. Meanwhile with his father, he was eating calmly until he heard his daughter's scream, but he did not hesitate twice and got up heading towards where his daughter was, but not before grabbing the axe. After a few moments, Kai's father entered the room arriving at the same moment that Issei woke up, who was completely confused wanting to know where he was. He even tried to get up, but when he did he felt a terrible body pain and he felt very weak. Issei. Where am I? He said asked with a weak and pained tone, wanting to sit on the futon but couldn't do it. Hi. Wait a second she exclaimed worriedly, going to help Issei so that he could lie down on the futon. Issei. Who are you? Where am I? He said asked with great difficulty, looking into Kai's eyes. Hi. My name is Kai Kamado he is my father Ines Kamado, what is yours? She said introducing her father and herself and then asking for the name of the demon. Issei my name is Issei. Hi. It's nice to meet you Issei she said with a smile, while Issei didn't say anything and just closed his eyes and fell asleep again. Ines. We have to let him rest, Kai, if he wakes up again tomorrow we will ask him whatever questions are necessary, he said in a somewhat serious tone, while Kai just nodded. Hi. Okay, Otu-san she said with some sadness, remembering how Issei's eyes showed nothing but loneliness, a sad and deep loneliness. The next day. We see how Kai was supporting Issei so he could walk to the kitchen. When he arrived he carefully helped Issei sit on the floor. Issei. Thank you if it weren't for you, I wouldn't have been able to get up, he said with a grateful tone, but still keeping the same weak tone as yesterday. Hi. Don't worry, I like to help people, and besides, you're very weak, it's normal that you can't walk, much less get up by yourself, he said in a kind tone, while serving some hot soup in a bowl. Hi. Here you go, do you want me to help you eat? She said asked somewhat curiously, while Issei shook his head. Issei. I'm not as weak as you think I can do it alone he said with a confident tone, grabbing a wooden spoon with some difficulty and then tasting the soup. Issei. This is delicious it's been a while since I've eaten something like this he said honestly, proceeding to eat the soup. Hi. Thank you although it's the first time that a boy, apart from my father, tells me that she said with a smile, remembering how the boys who approached her were scared away by her father. Ines. What are you two talking about? He said asked entering the kitchen, drawing Kai and Issei's attention. Hi. From the food that Tusan prepared, just that she said while watching her father sit near her, holding the axe he uses to cut firewood in his hand. Tusan why she didn't finish speaking because Ines interrupted her, looking seriously and distrustfully at Issei. Ines. Keep quiet Kai, I want Issei to answer a question I've had since you brought him to this house he said in a serious tone, while Kai didn't say anything. Issei. What do you want to ask me, Mr. Ines? He said asked in a somewhat serious tone, looking at Ines. Ines. I'll get straight to the point what are you really? He said asked seriously, knowing that Issei was not human. Issei. Sigh I'm a demon he said in a somewhat serious tone, knowing that it would be stupid of him to lie to the Kamado. Quickly, Ines grabbed Kai by the arm who was surprised by what Issei said, who to demonstrate what he said, showed his dark matter wings and then put them away. Ines for his part was protecting Kai and tightly gripping the handle of his axe. Issei. If you want to kill me, do it I have already hurt and killed many people, the things I did are unforgivable, he said in a somewhat serious tone, remembering the people he killed. He didn't feel bad or guilty about having killed and tortured in cruel and sadistic ways every member who was linked to Qulippoth, since after all, none of them were absolved of all sin. But he did feel a little bad about having killed innocent people in his search for purgatory, people who had done him no harm and perhaps had their sins, but in the same way he had no right to take their lives. Ines for his part was going to kill Issei after all, he was in such bad condition that even human weapons could hurt him and even kill him. But before he could move from his spot, Kai had stopped his father. Hi. Wait a second Otu-san, we can't kill him just like that, at least you could give him, I don't know the benefit of the doubt she whispered in a serious tone, while Issei remained sitting on the floor. Ines. Benefit of the doubt Kai, do you know what you're saying? He's a demon and you yourself heard him say that he hurt and killed many people, we were lucky that he didn't kill us last night, he whispered in a serious and angry tone with his daughter, ready to kill the demon, but Kai stops him again. Hi. And you yourself heard that he feels bad and sorry for what he did, also who or what assures us that most of those people were good? He whispered asked seriously, having noticed that Issei's words were loaded with some regret. Ines. He's a Kai demon and demons lie, he said that so you would turn against me, and that's what he's achieving. I'm going to kill him whether you like it or not he said seriously going to where Issei was and raising his axe. Issei for his part did nothing, he just stood there still without even caring that he was about to die. Ines was going to kill Issei without hesitation, but when the blade of his axe was almost reaching Issei's neck, Kai said the following. Hi. Why are you here and not in hell? he exclaimed making Ainz stop at the last moment, looking somewhat annoyed at his daughter. Ainz. Kai, what have I? He didn't finish speaking because Kai interrupted him. Hi. Do you belong there after all? It's your home, she said while Issei didn't say anything, just sighed. Issei. I no longer belong to the underworld, my own race turned their backs on me, exiling me forever. Even my own family had turned their backs on me, he said, having remembered his exile that was 5 years ago. Ainz, upon hearing that, realized that Issei had said it sincerely, without lies or deception. With doubts and insecurity, he moved his axe away from Issei's neck, who was surprised by that. Ainz. Why? Why were you exiled? He said seriously while Issei sighed, somewhat tired. Issei. I was exiled because unlike my brothers I did not possess power or talent for battles, not even a little. I was just the complete disappointment of my family and my race, he said in a somewhat serious tone, knowing that to be someone important, you had to be strong or have something that made you look strong. Because if you don't show any power or talent you are just trash in front of others. Hi. And the people you say you've killed are. She didn't finish speaking because Issei interrupted her. Issei. Supernatural beings, angels, fallen ones, demons, Nordics, any kind of race less humans. I didn't kill any humans, and I don't plan to do so either, he said in an honest tone, while Kai looked at his father who didn't say anything. Hi. You feel bad about killing them, right? He said as he sat in front of Issei. Issei. That's right. Ainz. It's okay, I won't kill you, he said with a serious tone and reluctantly releasing his axe, while Issei looked at that strangely. Issei. Why not? He said surprised. After all, he wanted to be killed without them having mercy on him, just as he had no mercy on the people he killed. Ainz. I didn't notice any gram of lies or deception in your words. I don't know if you're being sincere or if you're just really good at this, so you better thank my daughter for being the reason I didn't cut your head off, he said in a serious tone, ready to leave the kitchen, however. Ainz. And by the way, you can swear that I will be watching every move you make, he said in a serious and firm tone, ready to watch the demon 24 hours a day, and then left the kitchen. Hi. I'm sorry to my father for that, it's just that I didn't finish speaking as Issei shook his head. Issei. You don't have to apologize, it's normal that he reacted that way, anyone in his place would have done it after all. In the books they show us as lying and manipulative monsters, although that is partly true. Hi. Don't say that out loud, if my father hears you he won't hesitate to kill you, and I won't be able to do anything to save you again, he said in a somewhat serious tone, while Issei nodded. Hi. Do you want to eat some more soup? He said seeing how Issei's bowl was empty. Issei. May I? He said curiously, after all he had really liked the soup. Hi. Of course, but first I'm going to warm it up, she said with a warm smile, which had made Issei feel strange. 3 weeks later. In the time that passed, Issei only focused on recovering both his physical and magical state. The first days he was helped by Kai, with whom he had freed himself so to speak. Telling him everything from his childhood to his battle against the King of Purgatory. But when it came time to tell him what he suffered at the hands of Risavum, Kai hadn't taken it very well, to say the least. When Issei finished recounting his entire life up until now, he had been expecting Kai to kick him out of his house or something along those lines. However, to his surprise, Kai had hugged him, something he hadn't expected. He thought she was going to focus on the bad things he had done, but he was wrong. Kai had focused on every word he said, including when Issei told her how he tortured Risavum and Cecilio. That didn't matter to her, she didn't care about the things Issei did after all, there was a reason behind his actions. Although not all of them made her strictly scold the demon, who felt like a helpless child. But that was what Issei really was, and Kiki noticed it. He was a helpless child who not only wanted to feel the appreciation of a single family member, but he also wanted to feel the appreciation of his parents and siblings. That they would notice him and feel proud of his achievements, that they would accept him for who he was. That same day, after a long time, Issei had cried again, being comforted by Kai, who was willing not only to accept Issei for who and how he was, but she was also willing to relieve and heal the loneliness and pain that Issei kept in his heart. However, Ainz had listened to everything Issei had told Kai, realizing that he had judged Issei by what the books and stories said about demons, and not taken the time to get to know or listen to what his life was like. And hearing all that plus the crying of that monster had made him feel bad. After all, no matter that Issei was 20 years old, inside he was still a child as his appearance suggested. After that day, Ainz took the trouble to teach Issei how to make charcoal, which Issei accepted. After all, he wanted to find a way to thank them for the lodging they were giving him. Once Issei understood how to make charcoal, the demon just got to work, but while he was doing so he talked to Ainz about some things, and Mr. Kamado asked Issei some personal questions, who answered them all honestly. As time passed, Issei slowly recovered until he regained all his strength and the fever he had disappeared. However, Issei managed to gain Ain's trust, who realized that Issei was a good boy and that the books as well as the stories were somewhat wrong regarding demons. Right now, we can see Issei wearing a black haori while underneath it he was wearing a black kimono along with a white hakama that covered his knees. Hanging on his back, he was carrying a backpack with provisions for 12 days. Issei. Before I go I would like you to accept this, he said, making a magic circle and from it taking out a somewhat large bag. Issei approached Kai giving her the bag. The somewhat curious Kamado opened the bag finding many gold coins, something that took her and her father by surprise when they saw the enormous amount of coins there were. Issei. I am very grateful for everything you have done for me, you have my eternal gratitude and please accept the coins, he said in a grateful tone while bowing. After a few moments, Issei stopped bowing and took out his wings of darkness ready to go south. But before he could leave, he was stopped by Kai. Kai. Wait a moment, Issei, she said, making Issei turn to look at her. Kai for her part approached the demon to just grab the demon's hands and put in them the bag that he had given her. Issei. Kai, doesn't this, he didn't finish speaking as Kai shook his head. Kai. You don't need to give us your money, Issei. I didn't take you out of that crater or save you from my father to receive something from you, I only did it because I thought and believed it was the right thing to do, and I don't regret having done it, she said with a warm and radiant smile that had taken Issei by surprise, but it also made him blush. Hi. Have a good trip, Issei, and I wish you the best of luck, he said, wishing the demon the best. Issei. Thank you for everything, Kai, you too, Mr. Ainz, he said with a grateful tone towards both of them, while Ainz just nodded. After that, Issei said goodbye to the Kamados who also did the same. Issei left without further ado using his wings of darkness, while the Kamados went back into the house to prevent one of the two from getting sick. A few minutes later, we can see how Issei was flying towards the south, being several kilometers away from the Kamado house. However, Issei remembered the moments he spent with Kai and Ainz, making him slowly slow down his flight until he stopped. Issei just looked where he was heading, only seeing an endless road, so he chose to turn behind him, seeing something he always wanted. Belonging to a place and being loved there, the time he spent with Kai and Ainz had helped him think that living a normal ordinary life like any other human lives wasn't so bad. The demon just looked in both directions until he made his decision. Issei headed towards the Kamado house, taking him a few minutes to get there. By the time he did, he landed and approached the door ready to knock. However, he was nervous and scared, nervous to ask if he could stay with them and scared that he would be rejected by them. But he gathered his courage and knocked on the door 3 times, waiting for someone to open it. It was Kai herself who opened the door and was surprised to see Issei, but she still let the demon in, taking him to the kitchen and surprising Ainz the moment she saw him. Ainz, Issei, I thought you were going south. Did you forget something here? He said, asked, surprised to see Issei, who was shaking with nervousness. Issei. And no sir, Ainz, I didn't forget anything, just that he said, but being very nervous he didn't know what words to say, completely missing the Kamado, but Kai realized what Issei was trying to say. Hi. Do you want to stay with us? Issei, she said, asked curiously, taking Ainz by surprise, who looked at Issei who was embarrassed. Issei. That's right, he said with a nervous and embarrassed tone, being the first time the Kamado saw Issei like that. Ainz. May I know why? He said, asked curiously, wanting to know the reason why Issei wanted to stay at his house, making Issei just sigh and gather some courage. Issei. I don't have a place to go or stay. Looking in the direction where I was going, I realized that it was going to be a long trip with no end, and I didn't want that, so I turned to look in the direction of where his house was, and that's when I saw what I was looking for, a place that I would like, to be loved and accepted for who I am and even call it my home, he said, that being one of his greatest wishes. Ainz. Belong here, of course you can, Issei, he said with a big smile, willing to accept Issei as his own son. After all, that's how he started to see him a couple of days ago. Issei couldn't help but cry with joy when he heard that. That's what he wanted to hear for a long time. Both Kai and Ainz had hugged Issei, who gladly reciprocated the hug from his new family, willing to put their lives first before his own. Time skip. It had been about 7 years since Issei became part of the Kamado family. In the first year, Issei collaborated by helping Ainz make charcoal, making twice as much as the Lord was used to. He also went with Kai to a town that was close to his house to buy things to make dinner, although Issei didn't feel very comfortable, after all he was new to the place. Even when Ainz sent him to the village to sell charcoal to the inhabitants who needed it, things didn't go so well, to say the least. He arrived at the Kamado house full of shame without even managing to sell half of the charcoal, but instead of getting upset with him, Kai and Ainz just laughed at him. After all, it wasn't such a big deal. Since then, Ainz was in charge of selling the charcoal, while Issei was in charge of making it, who for his part took it upon himself to teach Issei how to cook, being somewhat harsh and strict with the demon. Issei for his part was happy, he still couldn't believe that he was adopted and accepted by the Komodo, and that made him think it was a dream. But the reality is that everything was real, it wasn't a dream or anything like that, everything was real. As the weeks and months went by, Kai and Ain began to appreciate Issei more, and vice versa. However, Issei not only began to appreciate Kai, but also something else that he didn't understand or know what it was. Since he felt strange when he was near the Komodo, in addition to getting nervous out of nowhere when Kai came to brush or touch his hand at the times when she helped him cook. But Issei was not the only one, since Kai was also developing the same thing as the demon, but unlike him. The Komodo realized that she was developing feelings for Issei himself, who at the time knew nothing about it. After a year of strengthening their bonds as a family and having fun, funny and somewhat embarrassing moments, another year had begun. Although this year, Issei slowly began to understand what was happening to him until he realized that he was in love with Kai. However, Kai had denied that and thought that he was only attracted to her for her body, and even Kai was the same way, they would only be lying to themselves if they said they were in love. And because of that, they both avoided each other either inside the house or every time they went to the village. Ainz for his part had realized that and saw it as normal. Ai did not live with another man apart from her father, and it was common for her to be attracted to Issei. Well, the demon was not his first time living with a girl, since he was almost always with Ria's Gremory and her entourage. But he only felt admiration for them, at no time did it cross his mind to have a relationship with any of them, after all they were in a relationship with his brother Daniel. Anyway, it took Issei Yukai a few long months to clarify his feelings and know if what they felt for each other was love or physical attraction. By the time that day came, with some doubts and insecurities because they didn't know if the other felt the same way, but still, having gathered courage, they both declared their feelings along with their true intentions and of course, Ainz heard all that just to enter the kitchen. Ai and Issei, the moment they saw Mr. Komodo enter, were nervous and somewhat afraid of what could happen. Ainz, for his part, looked carefully and attentively at both Issei and his daughter until he let out a sigh and accepted their relationship. He couldn't deny the relationship between the two of them, not after hearing the sincere declaration from both Issei and his daughter. Although he was partly very upset to hear how Issei was honest and said that he was a little attracted to Kai's body, and of course he was going to grab his axe to kill Issei, and even if it hadn't worked, he was willing to kill him with his own hands. But she didn't do it since Kai was honest and said that she was also attracted to Issei's body, leaving her with no choice but to drop her axe. Although in part, she also accepted their relationship after all, they were adults so she didn't see it as so bad. Although he also gave Issei a warning that if he dared to break his heart or hit his daughter, he would chase him all over the world, be it human, supernatural, and even in the realm of the dead, and that he would not rest until he killed him slowly and painfully. I was a little embarrassed for a moment because his father was exaggerating because of how overprotective he was, but Issei promised honestly and firmly that he would never dare to do anything bad to Kai, never, something that Ainz liked to hear very much as well as Kai. However, the first few weeks as a couple were somewhat difficult as neither of them knew how to take the first step or who would take it, to the point that Ainz had to intervene to give them some advice on how they could improve their relationship, but everything he said didn't work. With luck they managed to see each other's eyes or talk to each other, but that only lasted a few seconds as they had no idea what to talk about. Until one day in the village, Issei had finished buying some vegetables that Kai asked him for to make dinner. But when he arrived to meet his partner, the aforementioned was talking to one of the men in the village who was her friend, and of course, that made Issei jealous to the point that he imagined that Kai was cheating on him with that supposed friend. That same day Issei didn't dare to look at Kai or talk to her, he just tried to hide the anger he had until he got home and got ready to make charcoal without taking a single second of rest. He even cut the logs with some anger, going so far as to crack the work area when he imagined that Kai wasn't cheating on him as one, but with 15 men all because of jealousy. This continued until Kai asked him why he was angry, to which Issei answered with a curt "I'm not angry," and clearly, Kai realized that he was angry. And every time Issei accompanied her to the village, she noticed how Issei looked with hostility at the men of the village, as if they were her enemies. Until she was fed up and tired of how Issei was acting, they both had their first but not their last argument. Meanwhile with Ainz, he knew very well why Issei acted that way, after all, when he was in a relationship with Kai's mother, jealousy appeared unconsciously. But he couldn't do anything, since he had no idea what to do to make Issei and Kai stop fighting, because sooner or later one of the two would end up dead. However, after a long time, more specifically around 3 months, both were able to gradually fix the problems they had between them. Issei for his part stated that he felt jealous when he saw her talking or hanging out with other men, and also that he was afraid of losing her, without realizing that if he hadn't said all that, he would have lost her. Ai, for her part, couldn't help but feel bad, since she didn't think that jealousy would affect her boyfriend, but it seemed that she had been wrong. Jealousy didn't only affect humans, but also demons or some other supernatural being. At that moment, she had grabbed Issei's hands and promised him that she would never ever cheat on him in her life and to engrave that in his head. That had made Issei happy, but when they returned to the town to do their shopping. Trusting Kai's word, Issei stopped having those thoughts for a long time. However, one day when a strong winter hit the village unawares, Issei along with other men was forced to cooperate to reinforce the houses to minimize the cold. So the men had to cut down trees, which reached more than 20 meters and had an enormous thickness, causing more than 6 men to have to carry them. But Issei did that task as if it were child's play. What everyone thought was going to be a 5-day job, because of the strong winds and the cold, did not last more than 2 days. The point of all that, Issei not only caught the attention of all the villagers for his strength and endurance, but he also captivated more than one girl and even a woman who made advances to him without even caring whether or not he was still in a relationship with Kai. Which, she had to swallow her jealousy not only to not make a scene, but also because of the conversation she had with Issei. Although that didn't go too far because Issei politely rejected them by saying sorry, I'm in a relationship. Still, that didn't stop Kai from indirectly bragging about her boyfriend to make her friends or some other woman or girl jealous. After a year, having overcome their jealousy and insecurities and having improved their relationship little by little without rushing things or anything like that, another year began, but about 2 months from the year to start. With all the nervousness but also all the courage in the world, Issei dared to propose marriage to Kai who, between tears of emotion and joy and being super happy, accepted the proposal of the demon who at that very moment was incredibly happy. Ainz had seen everything and couldn't help but be happy when he heard that seeing his daughter getting married was one of the best news he could have heard in his life. After all, the only thing he wanted was for his daughter to live in excellent conditions and happy, and he knew very well that Issei could give her that plus much more. But so as not to stay there like a statue, Ainz gave his daughter and Issei the rings that his wife and he used on their wedding day. Making Issei feel honored to receive the one his father-in-law used, while Kai couldn't help but get happy upon receiving his mother's ring. After that day, both Issei and Kai as well as Ainz began to make preparations for the wedding, which was going to take place in a month and a half. Although the preparations themselves were not many, they only made the altar and ordered some yukatas which were going to be the wedding outfits and nothing else. After all, it would only be the two of them and Ainz, since they chose to make it private and personal, and let's say that Issei didn't get along with the townspeople and inviting them to the wedding, knowing the small conflict between them, it was better that they didn't go and thus avoid any disagreement or something like that. However, when the wedding day arrived and Issei was standing at the altar unable to stop shaking from the fear and nervousness he felt at that moment, but while he was standing there he was wondering things like, will I be a good husband? Will I become a good father? Who of them will have this power? Will I be able to do everything right from now on? Those were the questions that caused him that fear and nervousness. Hell, he was even ready to run away, but before he could do so, Ainz had stopped him. Flashback. Ainz. Where do you think you're going, Issei? He said asked seriously, seeing how the demon had formed his wings of dark matter, which he had made disappear. Issei. Mr. Ainz he said with a nervous and trembling tone, not knowing what to say, while Mr. Kamado approached where he was. Ainz. Sai, listen to me very well, Issei, I know how you feel, and I also know about the doubts you have about doing this or not. Because when I was going to marry Kai's mother, I was about to do the same as you, I had no idea if I was going to be a good husband or a good father. But even so I gathered my courage and stayed to marry her, and to this day it is one of the things that I do not regret having done, he said with a nostalgic tone, remembering the good times he spent with his wife, while Issei did not know what to say to that. Ainz. If you want to leave here because of those doubts and fears, then do it. But you better not come back, because I'm not going to let you break Kai's heart again, understood? He said asked in a serious tone, while he headed towards the house to find out if his daughter was ready. Issei for his part stood there still like a statue not knowing what to do, until he made his decision to return to the altar waiting for his future wife. After a few moments, there was Kai wearing a little makeup and some ornaments in her black hair, as well as a beautiful yukata that matched her eyes. Ainz, who was carrying Kai to the altar, he secretly looked at Issei with pride and then nodded, causing Issei to do the same. After a few moments, Ainz had handed Issei his daughter who carefully took her by the hand and then hugged Mr. Kamado. Once that was done, Ainz walked around the altar to take his role as bishop, standing between the two fiancés. Kai and Issei were nervous, and it was obvious, because after that their life would never be the same. But the two were willing to support each other as the years went by. Note. Before getting to the next part, let me tell you that this will be something similar to Catholic marriages, and because Catholic, it's because when I looked up how marriages were done in Japan, I almost had a stroke and I couldn't do it. I know I'm doing that wrong since it's my duty as a writer to find out certain things and write them, and I'm sorry, I'm serious, but I didn't have the motivations and ideas to do that, end of note. Ainz. Coughing wife and husband, are you coming to get married without being coerced, freely and voluntarily? He said asked with a somewhat serious tone, looking at Kai and Issei. Issei. That's right, we come freely they both said together a little nervous, but sure of what they were doing. Ines. Are you determined to love and respect each other, following the way of life proper to marriage, throughout your life? He said asked seriously waiting for the bride and groom's answer. Issei. We accept they said with a small smile on their faces, getting lost in each other's eyes. Ines. In that case, since you want to get married, join hands and express your consent before this forest, which will mark this moment for all eternity, he said something serious, while Kai and Issei held each other's right hands and held the rings that Ines and Kai's mother once used. Issei. I, Issei Kamado, take you, Kai Kamado, as my wife and give myself to you, and I promise to be faithful to you in prosperity and in adversity, in health and in sickness, and thus to love and respect you all the days of my life, he said with a firm tone, while he put the ring on Kai's middle finger. I, Kai Kamado, take you, Issei Kamado, as my husband and give myself to you, and I promise to be faithful to you in prosperity and in adversity, in health and in sickness, and thus to love and respect you all the days of my life, she said in a firm tone, while placing the ring on Issei's ring finger. Ines. If either of you has any doubts about this, speak now or forever hold your peace he said seriously, there being a great silence in the place. Ines. Okay now I declare you husband and wife, you may kiss the bride he said, giving Issei his permission to kiss his daughter. The moment he said that, both husbands kissed each other in a kiss full of love and affection, and seconds later they separated completely happy. Then flashback. After the wedding, Issei and Kai proceeded to go on their honeymoon willing to visit different cities, or at least those that Issei considered incredible. They even invited Ein so that he could also know and learn other things, but he refused since he wanted to give them both their moments of privacy, and also it wouldn't be a honeymoon if he went with them. Issei and Kai had said goodbye to Ain's and then left the Kamado house and headed towards the first city, being none other than Las Vegas, United States. Issei, thanks to the fact that he was a demon, had no difficulty understanding English, while Kai understood practically nothing of that language. However, that same night, both spouses had checked into a hotel for one night, since the next morning they were going to leave for the next city that Issei had in mind to visit. But that same night, Issei had claimed Kai's purity as his own. Although it was a lie that in the middle of that moment, Issei remembered the times he was raped by Cecilio, along with Rissavam and his friends, but that was something that Issei did not care about for two reasons. The first is because he had already overcome all that, and all thanks to Kai, then the second is because he was dead, just that. That same night Issei set out to please and satisfy his wife, only caring about her and no one else. The next day after Issei and Kai had their special night, both husbands proceeded to move around the other cities, either by flying or using magic portals, so as not to have to pay for a single trip. They went from city to city for about a week and then returned to the Kamado house. But when they arrived they were surprised not to see Ain's inside the house or making charcoal, so Kai and Issei went to the town thinking that he was there. Kai had asked a first inhabitant of the town that she saw where her father was, but the inhabitant became sad upon hearing that and then told Kai that Ain's had died while trying to kill a bear that had been around the town for some time. That news had completely devastated Kai and Issei himself, who were guided by that same inhabitant to Ain's grave, which was next to the grave where Kai's mother was buried. Issei felt very bad and guilty, he was very sure that if he hadn't proposed to Kai to leave the village, he would have saved Ain's. While Kai didn't know what to do, she had lost the only family she had left, she felt alone at that moment until she felt her husband hug her and just cry in her chest, she didn't want to believe it, she wasn't able to accept it. For the next few days, Issei was in charge of making and selling charcoal, while on the way he hunted animals to make lunch and dinner. Although selling charcoal was a bit difficult for him, but unlike the first time, this time and the other times went more or less well for him. When he returned home, he was in charge of making food for him and for her, and speaking of the Kamado, she was still hurt by her father's death. It was such a hard blow that she didn't know if she would be able to overcome it. However, one day a person had delivered a letter to Issei who was selling charcoal to the town, he was surprised by that, but when he saw that the letter had Ain's name on it, he didn't think twice and ran at top speed to the Kamado house. Flashback. We can see how Issei entered the Kamado house, slamming the door and going to the room he shared with his wife, and of course, when he heard the main door of the house close, open and slam shut, he missed her so much that he left his room seeing his husband. Hi. What's wrong Ice? Why did you come in like that? He said asked in a dull tone, while Issei handed him the letter he had in his hands. Issei. It's a letter from your father Kai, one of the villagers gave it to me a few minutes ago he said, while handing the letter to his wife, who was surprised upon hearing that. I with her hands trembling saw the letter, having her father's name and recognizing that it was his handwriting. She entered a room grabbing Issei's hand, entering the room with him. Issei. Are you sure you don't want to read? He didn't finish speaking as his wife interrupted him. Hi. Don't worry, I'm sure Otu-san would have wanted us to read it together, she said with a sad tone, while Issei didn't say anything and sat next to his wife on the futon. I just gave a deep sigh and then carefully opened the letter so as not to tear it. After that she and Issei proceeded to read it. Dear Kai, you have no idea how sorry I am for putting you through this difficult time. I feel like the worst piece of trash in the world, knowing that if you're reading this it's because I'm dead, but if you are reading this, it means that you are married to a great guy who you surely love and I approve of. I know it will be hard for you to get over my death, and I know that because I went through the same thing with your mother. But I have a feeling that the guy you married and decided to spend the rest of your life with will be supporting you, comforting you and trying to make you happy, through thick and thin. I love you very much, my daughter. You are one of the best things that has ever happened to me in my entire life. Please try not to be so hard on your husband. Sincerely, a friend. After finishing reading the letter, Kai couldn't help but cry because of it, while Issei hugged his wife, letting her cry on his chest. Issei gently and lovingly caressed Kai's back, who a few minutes later stopped crying, to just look at Issei. Hi Ice, you'll always be with me, right? He said asked with a somewhat broken tone, while wiping away his tears. Issei. Of course I will always be with you love, do you think I'm here to play with your feelings? No, of course not. Never believe that because I love you Kai, and never in my life, I will never stop loving you or regret having married you, he said with a tone full of affection and a firm tone in the last words he said. Then flashback. After that day, Kai began to help her husband in making and selling charcoal, she even took charge of hunting the animals that were found in the forest. Kai had returned to being the same woman as Issei remembered her, and with whom he fell in love. However, as the weeks and months went by, Kai began to experience nausea and vomiting, food cravings, whether sweet or salty, mood swings, among other things, and her belly began to swell. You didn't need to be a college graduate to know that she was pregnant. Issei for his part was happy and nervous since he had no idea how to raise a child, but he was willing to give his best. But in order not to leave Kai alone, Issei created a physical clone which would make charcoal and sell it to the villagers. The demon tried to fulfill his wife's whims, which Kai liked after all. It was a kind of sign that Issei wanted to have the baby, but it also bothered her since Issei treated her as if she were an invalid who is not capable of doing things for herself. Although then she remembered that it was going to be her first time as a father and she is a mother, so it was common for him to worry too much about her and the baby she had in her womb. And so the days continued to pass until the 9 months had passed. One night Kai's source had broken, which quickly woke up Issei, who had prepared everything for the birth. However, he didn't know how to do it, and worst of all, the nearest hospital was 250 kilometers from where they were, and even using his maximum speed he didn't think he could get there, plus he could harm Kai or the baby, plus it could also cause serious problems to the baby if he used a magic portal. He was afraid of losing Kai and his baby. He didn't know what to do until he remembered the villagers, but even more so the women who could help his wife give birth. Without wasting any time he covered Kai with a blanket and headed towards the village. However, when he left the house he realized that there was a terrible windstorm and a lot of snow falling from the sky. Issei did not think twice and covered Issei with his dark matter to head towards the town. When he arrived at the town, he made a tremendous fuss, screaming for help, causing many people to wake up and come out of their houses to find out what was happening and the reason for the screams. But to the surprise and fear of all of them, they saw Issei's dark eyes along with the dark matter coming out of his body. Many began to say get out of here monster or things like that, even most of the men grabbed the first thing they saw to attack Issei, however. Flashback. Issei. I need you to help my wife please, he exclaimed in a pleading tone, while letting Kai see who was trying to endure her contractions. The men stopped when they saw that. They were surprised to see Kai pregnant, but even more so when they learned that the baby she had was from the monster. However, Issei knelt down, hitting his forehead against the ground in front of all the inhabitants. Issei. I beg you please save my wife and son, I don't want to lose them, he said pleadingly and starting to cry, while everyone didn't know what to say or do until. I need the women to prepare things for the birth, we will help this boy and his wife. Did someone hear what I said? Everyone move, exclaimed a serious and authoritative little old woman, while the women proceeded to do what she said. Grandson. A grandson of the old woman. Grandma, you can't do that, who takes that man's son? I don't finish speaking because the old woman hits him with her cane. Old woman. Do you even know what you're saying, kid? We'll help Kai give birth, and I'm not going to let that baby die. And tell me one thing, have you ever seen a monster cry and kneel down? She said asked in a disappointed tone towards her grandson, who didn't say anything. Old woman. "Hey boy, I need you to take Kai to my room, come this is my house," she said, drawing Issei's attention, who didn't think twice and headed towards the old woman's house, entering it. Issei. "Thank you very much, ma'am," he said in a completely grateful tone as he entered the house, while he followed the old woman until he reached a room. "Old woman. You don't have to do it, put Kai in my bed," she said in a somewhat serious tone pointing at the bed, while Issei listened to her although some women entered the room making preparations for the birth. "Issei. How are you Kai?" he said asked with a worried tone. "Hi. I'm fine Ice in a lot of pain, but fine," she said with great difficulty, to grab her husband's hand. "Hi. I'm scared Ice I don't want to lose him," she said with a tone full of fear and worry that she might lose her baby. "Issei. Don't worry everything will be fine," he said with a firm tone, while Kai began to have more contractions. "Old woman. Where is the hot water?" she exclaimed asked excitedly when she didn't see any hot water anywhere. "Woman. He's on his way," said a woman from the hallway until she entered the room. "Old woman. I need you to leave the room, we will take care of saving your wife and son, they will be fine when you return, I assure you," she said with a firm tone, while Issei did not want to leave Kai, however. "Hi. We'll be fine Ice I promise please do what he says," she said in a somewhat pleading tone, while Issei had no choice but to accept. Issei for his part left the room but not only this one, but also the house to get some fresh air. He didn't know what to do, he was super worried about what could happen to Kai or his son, and even both of them, he wouldn't have the ability or the strength if they both died. "Grandson. What are you?" he said asked seriously while standing behind Issei and being accompanied by some men, meanwhile Issei had dried the tears he had on his cheeks. "Issei. I'm a demon now that you know, you would do me the great favor of leaving me alone," he said in a serious tone not wanting to deal with them, not while his wife was giving birth to his child. "And what do you plan to do to us if we don't do what you ask?" asked a man seriously, while Issei just sighed tiredly. "Issei. I don't want to hurt them," he said in a serious tone noticing the knives the men had. "You should have thought about it before coming here," he said in a serious tone going to attack Issei, but he only moved to the side and swept his feet, causing the man to fall to the ground while the others were going to attack Issei but. "Issei. Don't even dare to move," he exclaimed in a serious tone having activated his mark, completely scaring the men. "Issei. I'm not here to hurt you, and I don't give a damn about doing it, the only thing I care about is my wife and son who may die and what I want the least," he said deactivating his mark, just to kneel down and start crying. "Issei. The last thing I want is to lose them, I don't want any of them to die, they're the only thing I have," he said with a broken tone, having imagined Kai and his baby dead. The men felt bad seeing that, he was a demon, but seeing him cry like that made you feel like you were in the same place as him. "Man. I am sorry, it's just that I didn't finish speaking," as Issei shook his head while wiping away his tears. "Issei. No, I'm sorry it's just that, I don't have the strength to lose them, I wouldn't be able to continue living if they died," he said with a broken tone, only to feel a hand on his shoulder. "Grandson. They will be fine, don't worry women know what they are doing, and even more so my grandmother," he said with a firm tone and confident that everything would turn out well, realizing that he only got carried away by his fear and judged Issei without knowing him very well. "Issei. I hope so," he said hoping that everything would go well. After that everyone went back to the house, Issei wanted to go into the room for every scream he heard from Kai, but the men stopped him, assuring him that everything was fine. They continued like this for a few long minutes until Kai gave a loud scream and the sound of a baby reached Issei's ears. Without wasting any time, Issei headed towards the room, finding a completely exhausted and weak Kai, but his gaze went towards the baby his wife was holding in her arms, which was tangled in a blanket. Slowly and in disbelief, Issei walked towards his wife, who let him see the baby who had a mark similar to when he had the power of darkness. Issei had no words to say at what he saw. "Hi. Do you want to carry him?" he said asked in a weak tone, while Issei just swallowed hard. But he reached out his arms and held the baby firmly and carefully in his arms. He wanted to cry at that moment, he wanted to cry for such a wonderful gift he had received. "Hi. Do you want to name him yourself?" she said asked to Issei's surprise who looked at her if she was sure about that. "Issei. Are you sure Kai?" he said asked surprised since after all they were going to choose their son's name together, but she responded by nodding her head with a happy smile formed on her face. Issei for his part looked at his baby and was willing to call him Ainz like Kai's father until he remembered a conversation he had with his deceased father-in-law days before his wedding with Kai. "Issei. Tanjiro his name will be Tanjiro Kamado," he said, remembering that name that Ainz had asked him to give his grandson. Tanjiro it's a nice name," he said with a smile looking at his first son. Then flashback. A month after Tanjiro was born it was New Year's, the beginning of another year. As the weeks went by, Issei stayed to take care of both Tanjiro and Kai, while a clone of himself sold the carbon. However, in order not to run any risks, Issei had sealed the powers that Tanjiro possessed, although the mark that his son had did not disappear. Meanwhile, Kai slowly recovered from Tanjiro's birth, feeling better and better than the first few days after having Tanjiro. But the village elder had told her that it would take several months for her to regain her shape and state of being in which she was used to being. But Tanjiro cried, waking up his parents in the middle of the night, either because he was hungry or because he needed a diaper change, which Kai took care of the first and Issei the second. It was not an easy job, and all the villagers told him that, or at least those who had a son, which made Issei partly glad that he had sealed the powers that Tanjiro had, since he did not want to imagine the disaster that he would have made if he had not sealed them. However, speaking of the townspeople, as time went by they gradually got to know Issei, realizing that he was not as bad as the books and stories speak of demons. Well yes, they would be lying to themselves if they didn't think that Issei could do something bad to them after their son was born, but that never happened. Instead, Issei felt completely grateful and indebted to them, but more so to the old woman who helped give birth to Kai. As the months passed, Issei maintained a close relationship with the villagers, while Kai, after around 10.5 months, managed to regain her form and state that she had before being pregnant with Tanjiro. And speaking of Tanjiro, 2 months after his mother recovered, he had turned 1 year old, which had been celebrated in the village, which did not care if Tanjiro was a demon like his father. After all, he was a baby. The only thing he caused was that everyone was about to end up diabetic because of how cute Tanjiro was. However, that same night, Kai wanted to do it again with Issei too, according to her, give Tanjiro a little brother or sister, and having no other choice, Issei created a clone who was in charge of watching over Tanjiro, while the original Issei did the same with his wife. After that night, Kai talked to Issei about the name they were going to give their next baby, which were Nezuko, if it was a girl or Inuzuke, if it was a boy, which Issei accepted. Although he doubted that Kai would get pregnant again, after all, because of the god system, demons reproduce to a lesser extent. But to his disbelief, a few weeks later Kai again experienced the same pregnancy symptoms. Issei wanted to know how he was able to get Kai pregnant a second time, since the first time he thought it was some kind of luck or something, but now she was going to have another child. He wanted to know how he could get her pregnant that easily. Although he chose to put that thought aside and focus on the baby that was going to be born, willing to start preparing everything so that the same thing that happened with Tanjiro doesn't happen again. After another 9 months, Kai was about to give birth again, but unlike the first time, it was daytime, and the women of the town had everything ready and prepared for the birth. Issei for his part was worried while Tanjiro was cared for by a clone of himself, but unlike the first time. The birth had taken a long time, but in the same way, Issei was called by the old woman who had given him her baby being a beautiful girl, which undoubtedly had a great kinship to his wife. But when he looked at her, he was in shock while his breathing had stopped for a moment. There was a Kai being covered by a blanket with her eyes without any sign of brightness. The old woman had given him the sad news that Kai died due to a great lack of blood in the middle of childbirth, but apart from that, she had told Issei Kai's last words, which were, I'm sorry to be mean to you and leave this great weight on your shoulders, but please protect our children, don't push them aside. I love you so much, my love, I don't regret having met you, and much less having married you. Issei didn't say anything for a few minutes, until he asked the old woman for a favor to take care of her daughter and Tanjiro, who sadly and pitifully accepted. Issei for his part carried his wife to the place where Ainz and his mother were buried. When he arrived he created a shovel of dark matter, and proceeded to make his wife's grave. For every blow he gave, he remembered the moments he spent with Kai, the laughs, the fights, as well as the discussions they had. She was the only one who was never afraid of him, who had seen everything he hid in his dark and cold heart, having made all that disappear, and being one of the reasons why he fell in love with her. When he finished making the grave, he carefully laid it down on the ground and then closed the grave using the dirt that was around it. After that, Issei took the time to make a tombstone using different things, from pieces of trees to leaves and flowers. With all the pain he felt at that moment, he had placed his wife's tombstone just to cry in a heartbreaking way, feeling as if his organs were being soaked in holy water. After a few minutes of crying there, Issei returned to the town in search of Tanjiro and his daughter. When he arrived at the old woman's house, he created a physical clone after all. He was not going to be able to carry both of them, and then knocked on the door being opened by the old woman's grandson, who couldn't help but feel bad about the difficult moment Issei was going through. He only asked for his children back, and they were handed over to him, but before he could leave, the old woman and her grandson were willing to offer their full help in case he needed anything. They were even willing to take care of the demon's children. Issei appreciated the gesture of the two of them, but they were not the only ones, but the entire town was also willing to help and support Issei, which pleased Issei knowing that he was not alone. When he arrived at the Kamado house, he carried his daughter in his arms, thinking about what name he could give her, until the name that Kai had told him if his baby was a girl crossed his mind. And having no other choice, Issei named his second son Nezuko. In addition to avoiding problems and risks, he had sealed the powers that Nezuko possessed. 3 years passed after Kai's death and Nezuko's birth. Issei continued making a living taking care of his 2 children, in addition to continuing his work as a charcoal maker. He even took the trouble to remodel the Kamado house a bit, but he did not take out or change the location of the things of their former and true owners. The town, on the other hand, over time also remodeled some things and little by little began to grow in population, in addition to there being stores that had not existed before or things like that. But in the same way, Issei was still devastated by the death of his wife to this day, but all that pain he felt was healed by the affection and love his children gave him. Something that he did not regret having them. He did not regret having met his mother, falling in love or marrying her, after all. She, like Tanjiro and Nezuko, showed him that there was not only darkness inside him, but there was also light. Present. We find ourselves in the same forest where the Kamado house was, however, we can see the former leaders of the allied factions, along with the former patriarch Hyade and his 3 sons, in addition to the Hyade, Gremory and Citri retinues, all of whom are adults between 27 and 31 years of age. They were all following an office who was using her adult human form, who was taking them all to the place where that evil magic power was, which all factions had sensed a long time ago. Azazel. Hey office, it's not for nothing, but are you sure you are in the right place? Asked a surprised Azazel, already a little older, looking at the forest without being able to see anything or anyone. Eren. This is the place, I can feel small traces of that magic, he said with a somewhat serious tone, sensing a dark magic all over the place and even in the town they had passed a few minutes ago. The office. That's right, because if it wasn't, Azazel wouldn't have brought them, she said expressionlessly, making everyone agree with what she said. Ali. I just hope that guy is strong, he said in a somewhat serious but also arrogant tone, since it has been a long time since he had the opportunity to face someone powerful. Azazel. It's obvious that you haven't matured at all, Vali, he said with some mockery, looking at Vali. Vali. Look who's talking, he said in a mocking and ironic tone, since Azazel was still the same lazy and carefree guy as always. Hiroka. Neither of them has matured, Naya, she said in a somewhat serious tone, which bothered Azazel and Vali. The rest of their way everyone was arguing about who was mature and who wasn't. Those who stayed away from that discussion were the former patriarch Hyade, Sona and Tsubaki, Eren and Office. Office. Were you able to find any trace of him? Eren asked in a sad tone, while Eren became sad upon hearing that. Eren. I still don't understand why you want to know that, Office. Don't you remember the harm that you or they did to him? He said in a serious tone, looking with some hatred at Office, at Sona, along with her queen and her parents. After all, he knew that they were one of the several people who had turned their backs on his younger brother on the day of his exile. Office, for her part, didn't say anything. She felt sorry and she wasn't the only one. Sona and Tsubaki, as well as Emilia and Aiden, were the same way. Eren has hated them for a long time after finding out that they accepted Issei's exile. Which had made him stop being part of the Hyade clan and the underworld, having lost his throne as the next Hyade patriarch and his privileges as a supreme class demon. Even the elders of the demonic council threatened him with not giving him back his position if he dared to leave the underworld, which he did without hesitating for a single second. Eren, for his part, quickened his pace, not wanting to be with them any longer, while Emilia and Aiden regretted having let themselves be carried away by their pride as well as their honor when it came to exiling and turning their backs on the last of their children. They all continued walking until they reached a rather large house with a hut, being nothing more than the Kamado house. Behind them the others had arrived, wondering why they were standing still. Until they managed to feel that in the house there was an enormous concentration of that dark and sinister magic that they had felt years ago. But unlike the times they managed to feel that magic, this time it was much more terrifying, as if it were a part of the Trihixa. However, everyone heard a sound coming from a part of the forest and looked towards where that sound was. They managed to see a path where there were small traces of that magic. Gathering courage, they all went down that path guided by the trail of magic, being alert for anything, but the further they went, each and every one of them managed to hear the laughter of some children, along with some applause and what seemed to be some kind of rattle. They continued walking until they arrived at a small meadow, and in it, there were 2 children between 3 and 4 years old. The first one was a 4-year-old boy with maroon hair, dark red eyes, and wearing a turquoise and black checkered kimono and a strange mark on his forehead. Along with the boy, there was a 3-year-old girl with black hair, dark pink eyes, and wearing a pink kimono with triangular shapes and a red obi. The boy was jumping around like he was dancing, holding a piece of leaf with a bell attached to it, while the girl was shaking a drum-like rattle, making music for her brother to dance to. Issei. "Very well Tanjiro, that's how it's done," he said with a funny tone and a big smile, clapping along to the rhythm of the music his daughter was making. Clearly everyone could recognize that voice. They slowly turned their gaze towards that person, thinking it was someone else and not the one they were thinking of. But when they saw him everyone was stunned, seeing nothing but Issei, that demon who was expelled from the underworld. But to his great surprise, Issei was still the same as the day of his exile, but with the difference that his hair and eye color were no longer the same. However, Issei seemed not to have noticed them after all. He was focused and distracted by what his children were doing. "Amelia. Issei, son, is that you?" she said, asked in a surprised but also regretful tone, unable to bear it any longer upon seeing her son. The children on their part stopped to look curiously at the people who said their father's name, while on Issei's part, upon hearing the voice of his mother, he lost that smile he had to just turn around looking at all of them with a cold gaze, having his eyes a dark purple color. "Issei. What are you doing here?" he said, asked in a serious tone, looking at all of them coldly, causing more than one to have a very unpleasant chill when feeling the boy's penetrating gaze. However, everyone felt the dark and evil magic they had felt a long time ago. It came from Issei himself, but to everyone's fear, there were 4 scary and terrifying figures behind him, causing fear among all of them, making them remember the Trihexa. Not Issei himself was much worse than the Trihexa. Chapter 2. What the hell did they do? 7 years ago. We are in the same base that Issei was in a long time ago. However, in that same base were several troops of different races, collecting the rotting and dismembered bodies of what were once the fortress guards, in addition to gathering the bodies of the prisoners. But of course, between the horrible smell that the bodies gave off and the huge amount of flies along with the worms and the enormous rats, it caused more than one person to want to vomit or to be on the verge of decomposing. Although we will focus on Risivam's office, in which we can hear some somewhat distorted screams along with several pleas. However, we will focus on a 25-year-old Eren. He was watching a hologram of how his younger brother, like Issei, was being tortured by Risivam. The youngest of the Hyadu was screaming and begging Risivam to stop, something that the descendant of Lucifer did not do, and continued doing his thing with great pleasure. But it was noticeable how furious Eren was, even blood was coming out of his tightly clenched fists. However, the footsteps of a person approached the office until that person arrived at the room, being none other than Aiden, who at the moment of entering the room, managed to hear the screams and pleas of the hologram, approaching where his eldest son was. He was surprised to see a hologram in which his last son was being tortured at the hands of Risivam, screaming for someone to rescue him. He couldn't move. Aiden had remained still from the trance the moment he saw the hologram. "Eren. When was it?" he said, asked in a serious tone, bringing his father out of his trance. "Aiden. Eren." He didn't finish speaking because he received a strong blow from his first son. "Eren. When was the day that you cared more about your damn, disgusting pride than the well-being of your own son?" he exclaimed, asked angrily while tears came out of his eyes due to the great helplessness he felt at not being able to save and protect his younger brother. Aiden didn't say anything, he just stayed silent, looking at the ground with sorrow and regret. However, a few minutes later, a 23-year-old Daniel and a 22-year-old Adeland, who upon hearing Eren scream, quickly went to where their older brother was. "Adeland. What's going on here and why did you yell, Eren?" she said, asked somewhat seriously, entering the office. However, his vision, as well as Daniel's, ended up focusing on the hologram that was on top of a desk. Seeing nothing but Issei, being graped by Cecilio along with some guards. The place fell into deathly silence, but the only noise in the room was the younger Hyadu's pleadings. Eren for his part said nothing and began to walk ready to leave the office, but before doing that the brown-haired boy looked at his father to say, "Eren. I hope you're happy, because you haven't only lost Issei," he said seriously, leaving the office and the Risivam base. Present. We are currently in the courtyard of the Kamado house. In that place there was a huge, heavy, threatening and dark atmosphere, with Issei being responsible for causing that atmosphere. While the former leaders along with their companions could not move or say anything due to the monstrous creatures that were behind the now burgundy-haired man. "Issei. I'll repeat the question, what are you doing here? And how did you manage to find me?" he said, asked seriously, making the atmosphere heavier. The former leaders tried to speak, but they couldn't because of the fear they felt, and the atmosphere didn't help at all. However, that atmosphere had vanished in an instant the moment the children took Issei's hands. "Tanjiro. Tucson, who are those people?" he said, asked with a curious tone, looking and pointing at the visitors, who were stunned upon hearing the word Tucson. "Issei. They are old friends of Tucson. Why don't the children introduce themselves?" he said with a somewhat serious tone, although he didn't like the idea of his children introducing themselves to their parents at all, but he knew that their education was more important than that. "Nezuko. I am Nezuko Kamado, nice to meet you," she said, bowing slightly. "Tanjiro. My name is Tanjiro Kamado, it's also a pleasure to meet you, he said, making a small bow like his younger sister. Amelia, seeing that, couldn't help but want to approach and hug her grandchildren. After all, they were both so tender and cute that she couldn't help but give them whatever they wanted. But before she could approach them, Issei put his children behind him and then looked seriously at the former matriarch Kaido. Issei. Tanjiro, take your sister home. I'll talk to them for a while, and when I'm done, I'll prepare their favorite senbei, okay? He said, asked with a somewhat serious tone, directing his gaze towards his firstborn who, upon hearing that, his eyes began to shine. Tanjiro. Understood Tusan, let's go Nezuko, he said with an excited tone and carefully grabbing his sister's hand, starting to leave the place, but. Nezuko. Can you also please give me Ani-chan senbei, Tusan? She said, asked in an animated tone, because Tanjiro's senbei was the best, especially if it was prepared by his father, who only gave a small smile. Note. Senbei are Japanese cookies made from glutinous sticky rice flour. They come in different shapes, sizes and flavors, end note. Issei. Of course, now go to the house. This will only take a few seconds, he said in a kind tone, to which Nezuko just nods and she and her brother headed towards the house. The children said goodbye to the visitors and went to the house, so the adults moved aside so that Tanjiro and Nezuko could continue on their way. Once they left, each and every one of them turned their gaze towards Issei. Issei. Get straight to the point, will you? I don't want to make my children wait too long, he said in a serious tone while crossing his arms. Amelia. Son, could you? She didn't finish speaking because Issei looked at her penetratingly with those dark purple eyes, causing a huge chill to run through her body and great fear to flutter. Issei. Did you forget or do you have amnesia, Mrs. Haidu? Because if I remember correctly, you disliked me as your son and you were even one of the people who accepted my exile. So I don't understand the need for you to call me that way, he said seriously and coldly, without even measuring his words, causing Amelia to say nothing as well as the others. Issei. If you don't plan to say anything, you better leave, you just wasted your time and mine with my children by coming here, he said seriously, walking towards the Kamado house, passing by the people who turned their backs on him. Azazel. We came here to find out if that dark presence is a threat or not. Are you a threat to the Issei factions? He said, asked seriously, stopping his former student who just turned to look at him. Issei. If it were a threat, you and the other factions would not be alive today, he said with a somewhat sadistic tone and with a big smile full of fun, causing everyone to be bewildered. Issei. Do you have any other questions, Azazel? He said, asked without even caring about what he said before. Michael. Were you responsible for dismantling Qulippoth? He said, asked in a serious tone, realizing, like the others, that the Issei in front of him is not the same as before. Issei. That's right, I did it. After all, I didn't expect you guys to do it, he said with a somewhat serious tone, noticing how some emanated an arrogant aura. Issei. If you have nothing else to say, leave. I'm not going to repeat it again, he said with a serious tone, causing a 28-year-old Lefei to make a portal. However, Amelia tried to leave the portal and go to where her son was, but Aiden stopped her by holding her, earning several blows from his wife, asking him to let her go, but the former patriarch Kaido did not do so. After a few seconds, everyone left while Issei turned around without even caring about the scene his mother made. The burgundy-haired boy began to walk towards the Kamado house, but. Eren. Can we talk, Issei? He said, asked in a calm tone, standing behind his younger brother, to which Issei just turned around looking at his older brother. Issei. Follow me, Nai-san, he said in a calm tone, making Eren smile a little, who only began to follow the burgundy-haired man. At night. We see how Eren was sitting on a bench looking at the night sky. The older brown-haired boy was calm outdoors until he heard some footsteps heading in his direction. It was none other than Issei, who had a wooden tray on which were 2 cups of tea and some matchas. Note. For those who don't know, machi is a cake made from machigamar in Spanish, glutinous sticky rice, end of note. Issei. 10 Nai-san, he said, offering him a cup of tea, to which Eren grabbed the cup and then made room for his brother to sit down. They both stayed in a comfortable silence, sipping their respective drinks while occasionally grabbing a machi. A few minutes later, they both finished eating, but still remained silent until. Issei. What I said wasn't true, you realize that, right? He said, asked with a somewhat serious tone, looking at the sky while Eren just nodded. Eren. Yes, I noticed. But it seems you enjoyed seeing their expressions, right? He said, asked with a somewhat serious tone, to which Issei let out a small sigh. Issei. Yes, I enjoyed it, and to be honest, I always wanted to be feared, respected, and taken into account. That I wasn't just any weakling, he said in a somewhat serious tone, remembering how everyone in the underworld saw him as if he were a miserable insect, without power, talent or potential. Issei. And yes, the idea of wanting to see the expression of terror on all of them while I killed them one by one in the worst ways crossed my mind. But I didn't see the need to do that, it was going to be pathetic of me to kill them just because they made fun of me for being weak. So I chose to move on with my life and leave all that behind, he said with a sincere tone, knowing that he couldn't live with that for the rest of his life. Eren. You are very mature even though your appearance shows otherwise, he said in a somewhat mocking and funny tone, stroking his brother's head, making the burgundy-haired boy laugh a little. Issei. You're right, I still don't have the slightest idea of why I still have this appearance. But in these years things happened to me that made me mature in addition to making me forget that I was a demon, he said with a somewhat sad tone, but also nostalgic, looking at his wedding ring, something that Eren noticed. Eren. I'm sorry, he said in a sad tone, realizing that his brother's wife passed away. Eren. What was his name? He said, asked, watching as his brother wiped away a tear. Issei. Kai, her name was Kai, and she was the most beautiful and kind woman I have met in a long time, she even surpassed that stupid spoiled Ria's Gremory, along with the idiots who accompanied her. They, and even the women of the entire underworld, did not compare in anything with Kai. She did not need makeup or a very expensive dress to look beautiful or have an exaggeratedly voluptuous body. She was beautiful for her honesty, strength and her kindness. Even when I revealed that I was a demon, she was by my side, not being afraid at any moment, not even at the moment when she marked the limits, you know. He said with a somewhat amused but also broken tone, unable to avoid shedding a tear when remembering his wife. Issei Kai gave me beautiful and irreplaceable things, she gave me her love, a pure and honest love that I reciprocated, even though I didn't know how to do it until I knew how to reciprocate it. In addition to having given me those two beautiful gifts that are inside the house, and there is no day or night that I don't thank her for it. However, there are times when it is too hard for me to accept that she is not there, that she is not with me and the children, but even so I plan to move on, both for the sake of my children and for my own. I do not intend to leave them alone for a moment, even if it means having to give my ass to raise and protect them, he said in a very firm tone, willing to do whatever it takes for his children. Eren. I know you will too, and don't hesitate to ask for my help for whatever you need. I'm not leaving you alone again, he said with a confident tone along with a smile, stroking his younger brother's hair and willing to help him as he couldn't do on the day of his exile. Eren. You know they will do it right. He said, asked in a somewhat serious tone, knowing that the former and current leaders will try to make Issei return to the underworld and join their ranks because of the power he had inside him. Issei. I know, but I don't care about the proposals or deals they try to give me. I don't plan on accepting anything from anyone, I will continue living here with my children whether they like it or not, he said seriously, willing to destroy the factions if they dared to touch a single hair of his children. Eren. I understand, unfortunately I have to go Ataudo, but I assure you that I will come to visit you, he said with some sadness, getting up from the bench like Issei. Issei. Don't worry Nai-san, and you can come whenever you want. It was nice to see you again, he said with a somewhat happy tone, hugging his brother who also did the same. After that, Eren left the Kamado house through a magic circle, but not before saying goodbye to Issei, who also said goodbye to his older brother. By the time Eren left, Issei alone went inside the house ready to sleep with his children. 2 weeks later. During all the time that passed, Issei was very calm, having a good time with his children, making and selling charcoal for the villagers. Then he returned to the house to tidy up a bit and make food. Although on some days I ended up receiving visits from Eren, who came accompanied by Jean, the member of the Heroes faction, as well as being the woman who inherited the spirit of the Maid of Orleans, Joan of Arc. But to Issei's surprise, Eren and Jean had been a couple for about 4 months, because when Eren left the underworld, he began to have contact with the hero faction to locate the burgundy-haired man, but that contact gradually became closer but more towards Jean than any other member of that faction. But leaving that aside, Issei introduced Eren and Jean to his children, telling them that they were their uncles. Obviously, Tanjiro and Nezuko for their part were happy and excited to meet them, since they didn't know any relatives other than their father or the old woman who helped give birth to Kai, calling her Oba-chan. Eren and Jean's visits were not very frequent, sometimes they went to say hello and give some toys to Tanjiro and Nezuko, or other times they went to eat. However, both Jean and Eren chose not to ask Issei anything about his stay or how he escaped from Risavum's base, nor to ask how he obtained that dark power. We currently see how Jean was playing tag with Tanjiro and Nezuko, while Issei and Eren were in charge of making food. The courtyard of the Kamado house was filled with a cheerful and fun atmosphere, an environment that Issei was used to spending alone with his children, but he realized that it wasn't so bad when accompanied by other people. After a few minutes, both brothers finished cooking, so they prepared everything to eat outside. Everyone was eating and talking about different things, it was definitely a nice day. However, the smile that Issei had on his face ended up turning into a serious expression as he stood up from his bench, while Eren and Jean did the same. Tanjiro and Nezuko for their part looked at their father curiously, since they almost never saw him make that kind of face. Issei. Jean-san, would you do me a favor and watch the children? He said asked in a somewhat serious tone, while Jean nodded and went to where the burgundy-haired boy's children were. Jean. Come on kids, let's go to the house to play with your new toys, okay? She said asked in a somewhat sweet tone, trying to get both brothers to go to the house with her. Tanjiro. But what will Toussaint and Oji-san do? He said asked with a curious tone, while Issei approached him to just caress his head. Issei. I'm just going to go see something with Eren, it will be quick I assure you, he said in a soft tone, stroking his son's hair. Nezuko. Can we go with you Toussaint? She said asked because she didn't want her father to leave her, but Issei just caressed her head. Issei. Unfortunately no, those are adult things. But one day I will take you to a place where you will have a lot of fun, he said in a loving tone, drawing his children's attention. Both. Are you saying that in Surleo? They both said asked with excitement, wanting to know what that place was. Issei. I promise. But if I find out that you didn't listen to Aunt Jean, I won't take you because you're bad kids, he said in a somewhat scolding tone, while both children went to where Jean was and both grabbed the blonde's hands. Both. Let's listen to Aunt Jean, Toussaint, they both exclaimed in a firm tone, while Issei turned his gaze towards Jean. Issei. I'll take care of your orders, Jean-san, he said in a somewhat serious tone, entrusting the safety of his children to the blonde. Jean. Don't worry, I'll take good care of them. Come on, kid, she said in a firm tone, heading towards the house with the Kamado brothers. Issei. Okay, you can go out, he said seriously the moment Jean and the children entered the house. Both Issei and Eren turned to see a part of the forest, finding the former leaders of the biblical factions, along with several soldiers of different races, who came out from behind some trees. Searches. Issei-kun, we want, he didn't finish speaking because Issei threw the table they were eating at him. Unexpectedly, Searches ended up receiving the table full on, while the plates of food and salad soiled his clothes along with his face. While the others got into battle stance, as did Michael and Azazel, however. Issei. You have 5 minutes to explain what you're all doing here or else, he said seriously, while a mark appeared on his forehead, having increased his power to an abysmal level, scaring the soldiers as well as the former leaders of Heaven and Grigori. Issei. I will finish you all off, he said threateningly, making his sacred gear appear while Eren did the same, not even caring about the mark or the words his younger brother said. Azazel. You said you weren't a threat, Issei, he said seriously, taking out his fallen wings and making a spear of light appear. Issei. I said that and I let the fact that you guys entered my property without my permission go. And now you're doing it again, as if this place belongs to you, he said exclaimed in an annoyed manner, making both former leaders see their mistake. Issei. So I suggest you leave now and don't come back, he said seriously, deactivating his mark along with his sacred gear. Michael. We just want to talk, Issei-kun, he said in a somewhat peaceful way, but at the same time seriously being on guard along with his brother. Issei. Talk. Well, they should have said that first before entering my property like nothing. But I don't care what they say, now get out, he said with a serious and threatening tone, however. Searches. Return to the underworld, Issei-kun, he said with a somewhat serious tone, as he got up from the ground and slowly approached the burgundy-haired man until he was in front of the aforementioned. Issei. Did you go deaf or what, Searches? I want everyone to get out of my house now, he said ordered seriously, while Searches made a magic circle from which a scroll came out. Searches. Sign this paper, Issei-kun, if you do you will have the surname Haidu again, in addition to obtaining the privileges of a supreme class devil. You will receive your evil pieces with which you can reincarnate whoever you want, you can even have a harem of women, he said, trying to persuade the youngest Haidu, giving him the scroll. Searches. And your children will also have their privileges, they will receive whatever they want, in addition to receiving educations from prestigious schools, with the best teachers in the supernatural world. They will live as if they were a prince and a princess, you won't have to worry about anything, he said using, according to him, his wild card being Issei's children. Issei for his part was silent, although to Searches' satisfaction the burgundy-haired man grabbed the scroll. However, a purple fire began to destroy that piece of paper until it turned to ashes. Issei. Do you have anything else to tell me, Searches? No, then get out of here, I won't repeat it again, he said seriously, turning his back on the former Lucifer. Searches. Are you sure of your decision, Issei? There are many women in the underworld who are willing to take your wife's place, he said making the Kamado stop, giving him a small smile. Searches. Those beautiful women with great bodies will do everything you want and say, they are even willing to share you and accept your children as your own. Are you really going to leave them wanting to meet you? he said asked while Issei just turned around and headed towards where Searches was. When Issei was in front of the Redeed, the former Mao extended his right hand towards the younger Hayadu, who just stared at him. The burgundy-haired boy also extended his hand ready to shake it with Searches's, however. Issei's hand ended up piercing Searches's stomach, leaving everyone present in disbelief. Searches, for his part, hadn't seen that coming and began to spit blood, while Issei removed his hand from the Redeed's stomach, having a furious expression. Issei. You should have followed my order, Searches, he said with a thick and dark tone, having his mark returned on his forehead. With a blow to the face, Issei sent the former Mao flying towards a very, very distant part of the forest. While the troops went to attack Issei, however. Azazel. I didn't finish speaking, because in a few seconds Issei finished off most of the soldiers. Issei. You better not get involved, he said threateningly, installing terror in the soldiers who remained alive and in Michael along with Azazel. Without thinking twice, Issei released his wings of darkness and began to fly at enormous speed towards where Searches was. By the time he managed to locate him, Searches was still flying but was slowly falling until he finally fell, crashing into different trees and then ended up on the ground face up. Issei for his part looked for the best position and once he found it, he undid his wings and began to plummet at high speed without any fear. Until he ended up falling on top of Searches, causing him to spit an exaggerated amount of blood, while several bones were broken and his organs were severely damaged. But not content with that, in a brutal and cruel way Issei began to hit different parts of Searches' body and face. Going so far as to knock out one or two teeth, in addition to breaking more bones and even damaging the Redeed's organs, much more than they already were. Issei. Listen to me very well, Searches. I don't care how many mentally retarded people you have kissing your feet, what alliances you have, how weak or strong you are. I will never, ever return to the underworld, and I don't plan on letting you control me like I was a toy, much less use my children for your stupid benefit, he said furiously, grabbing Searches' completely bruised but still conscious face and making his sacred gear appear. Issei. You can't imagine how much I want to kill you right now. I always imagined and even dreamed of wanting to take away that smile you had. I always dreamed of wanting to see you in this state, he said with a sadistic tone and smile, putting the blade of his dagger on Searches' neck, causing him enormous terror. Issei. But I won't do it. I don't plan on getting my hands dirty with the blood of someone as pathetic as you, and even less so that my children see me with that blood, but even so, he said seriously, and with a quick slash, he cut off the former Mao's arm, causing him to faint from the pain. Issei. The wolves surrounding this place will find him and eat him. So don't worry about your arm being out in the open, he said seriously, getting up from Searches' stomach. The burgundy-haired man only made his wings of darkness appear and then grabbed Searches' left foot. Without hesitation Issei began to fly towards his house. When he arrived, from the air he threw the dying and bruised body of the former Mao, while in the air he undid his wings, landing without problems. Issei. If you want him to live, you better take him out of here quickly, he said seriously, while some soldiers quickly went to where Searches was. Issei. I'll give it back to you, Azazel, he said seriously, throwing him a diary that the former leader of the Seados caught, but the moment he had it in his hands he said. Azazel. Perhaps he didn't finish speaking because Issei interrupted him. Issei. It's of no use to me anymore, you can do whatever you want with that thing. But leaving that aside, you better not come back here, am I clear? Also, tell that idiot Searches when I wake up that I don't plan on accepting any deal or proposal to return to the underworld, and if he doesn't like my decision, he should come and tell me face to face, he said seriously, while Michael and Azazel had no choice but to nod and leave the place, along with the living soldiers and Searches. The courtyard of the Kamado house fell into a huge silence. Issei for his part managed to calm down with his breathing and then looked around. Finding that the bodies and blood of the soldiers he killed were no longer there. Aaron. It seems we will leave the barbecue for another day, he said, trying to change the subject so as not to have to talk about what happened, but that only made Issei sigh. Issei. What do you want to ask me, Nai-san? And don't try to change the subject because I know you want to know where I got this power, he said in a somewhat serious tone, while Aaron had no choice but to face that. Aaron. Okay. Sai, who did you get that power from? He said, asked something serious, thinking that dark power was about the great change that his younger brother had. Issei. To be honest, I don't know when it happened, but I think it was more or less 2 or 3 years after I was held prisoner in one of Risivum's bases. In that place I was used as a slave, a toy and a hex toy. I practically didn't live the life I expected after being exiled. Until I met him, an old man appeared to me in my dreams, and I thought he was that, a dream, he said with a somewhat serious tone, remembering those events in parts. Issei. He offered me power. At that moment I thought I was becoming paranoid or desperate after all that I wanted. Power to get out of that place, he said with a somewhat serious tone, perfectly remembering the emotions and feelings he went through at that moment. Issei. I was about to deny that, but I didn't, since the small idea and a minimal ray of hope crossed my mind that it could be real, that I would have the opportunity to free myself. So after thinking about it more, I accepted. I accepted because I not only wanted to free myself, but I also wanted to get revenge on Rissavam and Cecilio. And I succeeded. What they did to me I multiplied by 4, even to this day I don't regret having done that, he said with a serious and sincere tone, without being able to look at his brother's face or eyes. Eren. I see, and that power, does it make you that way? Someone cruel and sadistic, like what happened a while ago? He said, asked with a somewhat serious tone, approaching his brother who was just looking at the ground. Issei. No, this power helped me release who I really was and say the things I thought. The only thing this power does is avoid my regrets, he said with a serious tone, remembering how he never felt sorry or pity for someone until after his battle against the old man. He recognized his actions and mistakes. Eren. You know that doesn't matter to me, right? He said, asked in a calm and soft tone, to the surprise of Issei, who felt a hand placed on his head. Eren. You will always be my little brother, whether you are the one from before or the current one. I will always love you as you are, he said with a firm tone with a smile on his face, while Issei was surprised when he heard that. Issei. Thank you, Nai-san. But I must go see how the children are, he said with a grateful tone towards his brother, who removed his hand from Issei's head. Eren. Okay, Jean and I have to go. But you better not forget about the barbecue, he said, making Issei give a small smile. Change of scene. Jean and Eren had left the Kamado house, while Issei took charge of preparing something simple and quick for his children to eat. After that, the burgundy-haired boy took care of the tasks he had pending to do. Right now we see how Issei was arranging 3 futons in his room while his children were playing a hand game. Tanjiro Nezuko. Choco Choco Lala, Choco Choco Teat, Chocola, Chokit, Chocolate, they said to each other while playing that game, while Issei only kept a small smile. Issei. It's time to sleep, children. Tomorrow you can continue playing whatever you want, he said in a somewhat sweet tone, while his children proceeded to lie down on their respective futons, while the burgundy-haired man went to blow out the candles in the place, and once he finished he returned to the room and lay down on Tanjiro's right side. Nezuko. Natu-san, where are you taking us? She said, asked curiously, because she wanted to dream about what that fun place was like as her father told her. Tanjiro. Is it true that it's as fun as you say? He said, asked looking at his father, who just smiled. Issei. It's a little surprise, and yes, that place is very fun, I assure you, he said with a confident tone, leaving his children intrigued. Of course both Kamado brothers wanted to get more information from their father, although due to tiredness a few long minutes later, Tanjiro and Nezuko ended up falling asleep. Issei, for his part, once he realized that, went to the kitchen to prepare some homemade chamomile tea to easily fall asleep. In addition to preparing some matchas. When he finished making the tea and matchas, the burgundy-haired man returned to his room and proceeded to drink his drink and eat in silence. But while he was doing that, Issei looked at the sky thanks to a window in the room. Although the burgundy-haired boy noticed how Tanjiro moved from one side to the other, as if he couldn't fall asleep. Issei. Is something wrong, Tanjiro? He said, asked somewhat worried, going to lie down next to his son who just opened his eyes and looked at his father. Tanjiro. I had a nightmare too, son. I saw a monster chasing me, but he didn't finish speaking because his father hugged him, beginning to stroke his head gently. Issei. Calm down, calm down. That monster will never hurt you, much less if I'm with you, he said in a soft, loving and firm tone, while Tanjiro reciprocated his father's hug. Issei. I will not allow anything or anyone to harm you or your sister. So you can be sure that that monster will not do anything to you, he said with a confident tone, then in a discreet manner, he used the dark matter to attract a tray on which there was a machi. Issei. Do you want the last machi? He said, offering him his dessert, to which Tanjiro grabbed it but broke it into 2 somewhat equal pieces. Tanjiro. Ten-2-san, he said, offering half of the machi to his father, who gladly accepted his son's gesture with a smile. Issei. Thank you, he said in a grateful tone, eating half of the machi with his son, so that Tanjiro could then lie down on the futon. Tanjiro. Would you sing me Dango Daikazoku? Tusan, he said, looking at his father, who covered him with the futon blanket. Issei. Sure, he said, and then coughed a little with his mouth closed. Issei. Dango, 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 Dango. Dango, Dango Daikazoku. Dango, 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 Dango. Dango Daikazoku. Yancha na yaki Dango Yasashi and Dango. Tsukashi Umemagachi na Tsukimi Dango. Asamashi Rubber Dango Yatsugo Kushi Dango. Minamina Awasit Hyakunan Kazoku. Akachin Dango wa Tsumo Shai was no Nakata. Tashiori Dango wa Mi wo Hozumeru. Nake ashi dango ti wo tsunagi akina mari wa nai nario. Wachi wo tsukiri dango hasbi no umina de wareao yo. Usagi mo sora de ti wo futemeteru dekai itsuki sama. Yureshi ikoto kanashi ikoto mo zenbu maramichi sang in a soft and loving tone until she realized that Tanjiro was sleeping peacefully. Issei. Have sweet dreams my little dangos, he said in a loving tone, giving his children a kiss on the forehead. The burgundy-haired boy was about to continue drinking tea, but unfortunately his drink was cold. He drank it all in one gulp anyway and proceeded to lie down next to Tanjiro, managing to hug his children with his right arm. However, when Issei was about to sleep, the aforementioned felt an enormous power very similar to the old man who gave him power. But this presence was much more powerful than that old man. Not having hesitated, Issei left his house silently so as not to wake his children. Once outside, the burgundy-haired man made his sacred gear appear and then made a slash in the air, managing to create a clone. Issei. Watch over Tanjiro and Nezuko, try to get them to sleep if they wake up. I'll be back in a few moments, he said somewhat seriously to his clone, who nodded and entered the house. The real Issei for his part created a magic circle in the direction of the underworld, being the place where that power came from. In the underworld, Gremory territory. Once Issei appeared in the underworld, realizing that he was in one of the Gremory family's territories, he quickly made his wings of darkness appear and proceeded to quickly go towards the Gremory mansion, being the place where that power came from. Although he encountered some demons along the way, but that did not matter to Issei, and he continued on his way, increasing the speed of the flight. When he arrived at the Gremory mansion, which was on fire from a purple fire, Issei did not hesitate and undid his wings, landing without problems on the spot, drawing the attention of those present. However, the burgundy-haired man's gaze ended up turning towards the former leaders who were injured. Issei. What the hell did you idiots do, he exclaimed, asked in an annoyed and serious way, having the feeling that they could have been the ones who caused the release of that person or thing that surpassed the power of the old man he faced and killed years ago. Chapter 3. I will help you. Several minutes ago. We can see how Azazel, Michael, Yusaka and Auden were in a secret meeting at the Gremory mansion, talking very seriously about Issei and the power he currently possesses. However, the talk that the former leaders of the allied factions were having was interrupted by someone who entered the room. That person was none other than Searches, who had fully recovered after the beating he received from Issei. Although unfortunately for Searches, he could not recover his missing arm because it was not found, and no one had the ability to make his arm regenerate, so he only had to depend on his only one until Azazel made him an artificial arm to replace it. Along with Searches was Grafia, who over the years had barely aged at all, just the opposite, her beauty as well as her voluptuous body were unmatched, she practically became one of the most desired women in the underworld, something that Searches liked to boast about on some occasions. But leaving that aside, Searches proceeded to take a seat, being followed by Grafia, who stayed behind him. While the other former leaders looked worriedly at Searches, since the Redeed was just a few minutes away from losing his life. Searches. I'm sorry I'm late. Where did you two stay? He said, asked in a somewhat discouraged tone once he sat down. To which the others just looked at each other, not knowing whether to answer him or not, until Yusaka took a breath and then said. Yusaka. We stayed in the part of where or how Issei-kun got that power, she said in a somewhat serious tone, but not believing that the boy who was her daughter's best friend is the bearer of that sinister and evil power that she felt years ago. However, upon hearing Issei's name, Searches couldn't help but remember how the burgundy-haired boy had no mercy or compassion when hitting him, in addition to the smile, the sadistic and evil smile that the burgundy-haired boy had at that moment. A huge shiver of fear ran through the former Mau's body, while his face took on an expression full of panic. Auden. Searches, she exclaimed in a serious but also worried manner, making the former Mau regain his composure. Searches. Is something wrong, Mr. Auden? He said, asked, trying not to seem nervous, but the expression on his face showed the opposite. Auden. Are you sure you're okay? He said, asked with a somewhat serious tone, to which Searches didn't know how to answer that until. Searches. No. I'm not, she said with a trembling tone full of fear, panicking again, putting her hands on her head. Searches. His strength, his speed, his power and his way of being. He's completely different from the Issei I remember, he said, still with that trembling tone, while remembering Issei before he was exiled. Searches. I remember that he was weak but intelligent, kind and stubborn. But this Issei is evil and ruthless, without a shred of goodness in him, and I don't even know if he can or is worse than Risavim, he said with a tone full of fear, having remembered the 4 creatures he saw in Issei the day he saw him again after a long time. The room fell into a completely awkward silence. On one hand, Grafia tried to get her husband to regain his composure again, while the former leaders remained silent, having no choice but to accept the reality of Issei's great change, although they still had the question of where or how did he get that power. Although, a few minutes later Azazel made a face as if he had remembered something of utmost importance, to which he quickly began to check the pockets of his suit until he found one. He took out the diary that Issei had given him, earning the attention of Michael, Auden and Yasaka. Yasaka? What is that? Azazel don't know, she said, asked curiously, drawing Search's and Graphia's attention. Azazel. It's a diary that Issei gave me before we left his house, but now that I see it better, Cao gave me the same diary a long time ago. At first I didn't give it any importance, and I left it there in my office at Grigori's, he said while reading the pages of the diary, but that confused and raised more questions in those present. Michael. But how did Issei get that diary and what did he use it for? He said, asked with a somewhat confused tone, because he didn't understand why Issei had that book. Azazel. I don't know, but I thought it had turned to ashes along with the other things that were in my office when it was burned down, he said as he realized something, but he didn't know if it was true or not. Well, Michael, Yasaka and Auden, noticing the thoughtful face of the former leader of the Fallen, all three thought of the same thing. Auden. Do you think that boy burned down your tower, Azazel? He said, asked in a somewhat serious tone. Well, Azazel didn't know how to answer that, since he didn't want to blame anyone just like that. Azazel. To be honest, I don't know, he said in a serious tone, but without stopping reading the diary, and once he finished he slammed it shut. Michael. What's in that diary, Azazel? He said, asked in a curious tone, while Azazel gave a small sigh and passed the book to Michael. Azazel. Not much. On the first page there are some very strange words, he said, to which Michael opened the book, and on the first page he saw there were some strange words written which he did not understand, so he decided to continue looking at the diary and then pass it to Yasaka. Auden. How strange. He said, asked with a somewhat curious tone, receiving the book from the former leader of the Kyoto Yakai after the kitsune had finished looking at it thoroughly. Azazel. Enough for us not to understand them, but from that sheet there is information about a place called Purgatory and about the only two creatures that live there. After that, the other sheets are blank, he said in a somewhat serious tone, while Searches received the diary and began to look at it with his wife. Searches. But looking closely at these words, it seems to be some kind of spell to recite, he said with a doubtful tone, as he was not sure if that could be it. Azazel. Are you feeling better? He said, asked with a curious tone, receiving the book from Graphia and then looking at the redeed, who nodded. Searches. A little, but back to what I was saying before, he said in a somewhat confident tone, while Azazel said nothing. Auden. Are you planning to recite those words, Azazel? He said, asked seriously, but also curiously, to which Azazel responded by getting up from his chair. Yasaka. I don't think it's a good idea to do that, Azazel don't know, he said with an unsure tone, exposing his kitsune ears and tails, having the feeling that something bad is about to happen. Azazel. You can rest assured, nothing will happen, I assure you, he said with a firm and confident tone, standing in the middle of the room with the diary in hand. Michael. Do you at least have an idea of what that spell can do? He said, asked in a serious tone, having the same feeling as Yasaka. Azazel. We'll find out now, although if it turns out to be a portal or something like that, I think that by reciting these words again everything will return to normal, he said with a somewhat confident tone, while he opened the book, putting it on the first page. Everyone? Do you think? Everyone present exclaimed, asked unsurely, including Graphia. However, Azazel turned a deaf ear and without wasting any time he coughed a little and then proceeded to recite the spell, being careful not to mispronounce any word. By the time he finished reciting all the words correctly, nothing happened. The others seeing this sighed in relief, knowing that nothing bad happened, while Azazel was surprised that nothing had happened, however. In an instant, a portal had formed in the middle of the room, being 5 meters close and in front of the former leader of the Fallen, who stepped back in surprise. The 6 of them gathered together, carefully proceeding to approach the portal until they stood in front of it. None of them knew what to say or do. But because of the enormous curiosity he felt at that moment, Azazel reached out with his right hand with the intention of crossing the portal. Although at the moment he was going to do that, a great abysmal gale of wind came out of the portal which made them retreat for a few seconds, taking them by surprise. Without hesitating for a second, Azazel prepared to recite the spell again with the hope that this is the way to close the portal. But before he could say a single letter, those present felt like an abysmally powerful and sinister power seemed to be about to come out of the portal. The former leaders and Graphia had remained still from the shock but also from terror, however Michael recomposed himself and said. Michael. Azazel, close that portal now, he exclaimed in a serious and alarming manner, causing his brother and the others to pull themselves together. Without wasting time, Azazel began to recite the spell, while the others gathered their courage and got into a battle stance, ready to fight the person or thing that was going to come out of the portal. But just when he had a few words left to recite, a person or thing wrapped in purple fire came out of the portal, heading straight towards Yasaka, who was in shock. However, before anything could happen to the kitsune, Michael managed to help her, preventing her from getting hurt while the creature passed by, crashing into a wall. After that, the portal was closed by Azazel, who had finished reciting all the words correctly, but the former leader along with his companions gathered again, ready to fight the thing that was in a room next to the room they were in. They were all going to go together to see what that creature was, but the moment they moved, a strong pressure in the air made everyone kneel without having the chance to get up. But none of them could do it, between the strong pressure in the air and the lack of air that was increasing more and more. And in the end, without pain or glory, they all fell unconscious due to lack of air, while the Gremory mansion began to collapse and catch fire. Present. Azazel. And that was the last thing I remember, or rather we remember, he said in a somewhat weak tone, while Asia finished healing him. Everything that Azazel told was heard by the current leaders of the allied factions, along with his co-workers, Vali's team, the current patriarchs Haidu and Gremory. In addition, Issei, Aaron and Jean were also there, the latter wearing their pajamas, all of them being in the main room of the Haidu mansion. No one in the room knew what to say, the atmosphere was intense and oppressive, not being of much help. However, the atmosphere changed drastically and became dark and gloomy, while those present felt again that evil power from several minutes ago. But without having expected or seen it, Azazel received a strong blow to his stomach that took away all his air, Issei being responsible for having hit the fallen man and being responsible for emanating that power. Issei. Stupid crow, why the hell didn't you put it back in your office like you had it before? He exclaimed, asked in a very angry tone, grabbing Azazel by the collar of his suit. Azazel didn't answer because of the fear he felt at that moment, something that Issei noticed and had no choice but to let it out. The burgundy-haired man only caressed his forehead while whispering curse after curse and then said. Issei. I don't know who is more of an idiot, me for having given you that diary or you for not having stopped that womanizing imbecile, he said with an annoyed tone, while little by little he calmed down. But while the burgundy-haired man calmed himself down, some of those present were amazed to see Issei again, but more so because of the great change he had. Even Seraerd couldn't find the right words to describe the Issei in front of him. Azazel. Issei, I know you won't take this question well, but I'll tell you anyway, will you help us capture that thing? He said, asked in a serious tone, drawing the attention of everyone present. Of course everyone turned their gaze towards Issei, who remained silent with a serious expression on his face. That atmosphere was slowly becoming more and more sinister, frightening those present, however. Issei just laughed out loud as if there was no tomorrow, having completely confused those present. After a few minutes, Issei slowly stopped laughing to just look at Azazel. Issei. I'm going to take it the wrong way, he said in a funny tone and laughed again, however, his attitude ended up taking a 180-degree turn. Issei. Of course I took it the wrong way, Azazel. You're definitely still the same irresponsible person as always, he said in a serious tone, making the fallen one offended, but he couldn't help but agree with him. Issei. No, I'm not going to help them. I'll just leave this place as if what they did never happened, he said, turning around and ready to leave the Haidu mansion, however. Seraphol. Are you going to turn your back on your clan? He said, asked in a serious tone, seeing how the youngest of the Haidu stopped. Issei. Yes. That's exactly what I'm doing, Seraphol. I'm turning my back on the demon faction, the angel faction, the fallen faction. I'm turning my back on the allied factions. In short, also what you said is somewhat contradictory, don't you think? Since after all you were the first to have turned your back on me if I remember correctly, he said in a serious tone, leaving Seraphol silent, who only lowered her gaze remembering that day. Searches. But are you aware that without your help we won't be able to capture that thing? He said, asked in a serious tone, while Issei just shrugged his shoulders. Issei. Well, I recommend that you kill her if you can, that way you will be able to avoid sacrificing your lives and those of others in the attempt to capture her, he said with a somewhat carefree tone, beginning to walk to leave the mansion. Searches. But Issei, he didn't finish speaking because the atmosphere of the place became very heavy, enough to make those present short of breath. But that had no effect on Aaron, Jean and Seraerd. The one responsible for having done that was Issei himself, who had his mark activated and was slowly approaching Searches. Once in front of the Redeed, Issei lifted him by the shirt of his suit, looking at him with those empty purple eyes without any kind of shine. Issei. Listen to me well, Searches, and the rest too, because I will not repeat it again, he said seriously, capturing the attention of everyone present, who with difficulty looked at the burgundy-haired man. Issei. Since you freed that thing, you yourselves will take care of killing it or making it return to where it really belongs. I won't give a damn who helps you, but you better do it. I'm not going to help you or move a single muscle for you, he said seriously, releasing Searches and deactivating his mark, making everything go back to how it was before. Issei. I'm getting out of here, he said in a serious tone, leaving the Haidu mansion without hesitating for a single second. Once outside the Haidu mansion, Issei just created a magic circle in the direction of his home, waiting patiently to leave the underworld once and for all. In the Komodo house. Right now we can see how Issei appeared in front of the Komodo house. The demon wasted no time and entered the house heading towards his room. Finding his children sleeping peacefully while his clone was standing near the door. Issei. Was there a problem when I left? He whispered asked his clone, who just shook his head. Clone. Issei's clone, not at all, everything was calm he said with a confident tone, making Issei sigh in relief. Issei. Okay, you can leave he said to which the clone nodded, then disappeared turning into small particles of light, which entered the chest of the original burgundy-haired man. After that, Issei didn't think twice and lay down next to his children, managing to hug them both with his right arm. In just a few minutes, Issei managed to fall asleep without any kind of problem. 1 month later. During the entire month that passed, almost nothing interesting happened. Issei continued with his life as if the former leaders had never released that thing. He just spent his time doing his same daily routine or other times he did something different so that it wouldn't be so repetitive to always do the same thing. However, Issei could notice how Aaron and Jean's visits were no longer as frequent as before, and the times they did go to visit they seemed exhausted. Of course the last thing worried the burgundy-haired boy a little, who didn't hesitate to ask why they were tired. But he didn't receive any response from either of them and had no choice but to ignore that, although he would still prepare something for them or let them rest in one of the rooms of the Komodo house so they could recover their energy. Currently Issei was returning to the Komodo house, carrying a cart in which there were some bamboo baskets which were empty, a sign that he sold all the charcoal he had made. But the burgundy-haired boy wasn't alone, he was accompanied by his children who were sitting in the car. Tanjiro, for his part, was holding Nezuko in his lap to prevent anything bad from happening to her, while the younger Komodo was happily eating a peach. Tanjiro. Are you sure you don't want us to get off, Tusan? He said asked with a worried and uneasy tone, not wanting to be a burden on his father. Issei. I'm fine Tanjiro, don't worry. Even if it doesn't seem like it, Tusan is very strong he said with a confident tone, since carrying a cart with empty baskets and 2 children was not something that difficult to do. Issei. How are Obasan's peaches? Nezuko said asked something curious, remembering that the old lady of the village had given her a small basket with assorted fruits. Nezuko. They are very delicious, Tusan she exclaimed in a lively and happy tone, eating what little was left of the peach. Issei. Yes, I already expected it from her he said with a small smile, because it was not the first time he received fruit as a gift from the old woman. Tanjiro. Tusan, since when do you know Oba-chan, and why does she always give you fruit? He said asked with a curious tone, while Issei just gave a small sigh. Issei. It was 4 years ago, your mother and I went to ask for his help to do something he said with a nostalgic tone, perfectly remembering the day Tanjiro was born. Nezuko. What did Oba-chan do for Ka-san and you Tusan? She said asked curiously, since her father did not talk about her mother frequently. Issei. Oba-san helped his mother give birth. That day Tanjiro was born and 2 years later your Nezuko was born, both were born thanks to the help of Oba-san and the women of the village, he said with a small smile, continuing on his way, while his children did not know what to say until. Tanjiro. Tusan he said, drawing his father's attention, who turned to look at his son, somewhat confused. Issei. Is something wrong Tanjiro? He said asked wanting to know what his son wanted. Tanjiro Nezuko. What does it mean to give birth? Both siblings said asked in a confused but curious way, to which Issei cursed himself for saying that word. Issei. I'll tell them when they grow up, okay? And regarding the fruits, Oba-san used to give them to me and usually does sometimes, either out of generosity or because I helped them with something they needed, whether it was important or not he said, ready to change the subject, which he achieved. Nezuko. What things did you do, Tusan? She said asked after finishing eating the fruit. Issei. Just simple things, like helping them carry logs, carts, among other things. Although your mother taught me that helping people ends up being useful to you at the end of the day, he said with a nostalgic tone and a small smile, remembering the words his wife had told him a long time ago. Both children were a little surprised by the words their father said, who just kept walking until after a few minutes, they could see their house in the distance. Issei. Okay kids, he's coming I don't finish speaking, since as I continue walking I managed to see the current leaders of the allied factions, along with the former Haidu patriarchs. Note. To keep them in context, the current leaders of the biblical factions are Gabriel leader of the angels, Shemazai leader of the fallen, Saraerg leader of the demons, Kunu leader of the Kyoto Yakase and Thor, leader of the Nordic faction, end note. When Issei was close to them he didn't say anything and just parked the car near the house, then got the children out of the vehicle. But while Issei was doing that, Saraerg took some courage and proceeded to approach Issei, who just ignored them. Saraerg. Issei, can we talk? Please, he said, asked in a calm tone, to which Issei looked at Sarerg, while the children looked curiously at the former Belair. Sarerg. It's something quick, 5 minutes no more no less. What do you think? He said, asked with a confident tone, while Issei remained silent and then looked at Tanjiro. Issei. Tanjiro, do me a favor and play with your sister in the yard for a while, okay? He said in a calm tone, to which Tanjiro just nodded and grabbed Nezuko's hand as they went to the backyard of the house. Issei. Sai, you can come in, he said, having the feeling that he was going to regret doing that. Without wasting any time, Issei entered the house, letting the leaders and his parents pass, although Amelia noticed a black spot on her son's cheek. The brunette tried to clean it, but before she could touch it, Issei moved, heading towards the kitchen. Issei. Close the door and follow me, he said in a somewhat serious tone, continuing on his way while Layden closed the door as his son asked. After that, everyone followed Issei to the kitchen, receiving a "you can sit down" from the burgundy-haired boy, which they gladly accepted his gesture. Issei. Get straight to the point, Sarerg, he said in a somewhat serious tone, to which Sarerg sighed a little. Sarerg. Issei, we need your help to finish off Euclid Lucifuge, he said in a somewhat calm tone, while Issei was surprised to hear that name. Issei. Euclid Lucifuge. The same Euclid Lucifuge who has incestuous feelings towards Grafia. He said, asked with a surprised tone, leaving those present speechless by the burgundy-haired man's vulgar language. Shembazai. That's right, a few years ago he was seen in the city of Lilith, but we have no idea what he's done there. We've even tried to gather all the information possible, but nothing, he said in a somewhat serious tone, while Issei sighed annoyed. Issei. Damn son of a hitch, I thought I killed him, he said in an annoyed tone, looking at his right hand with which he had pierced the Lucifuge's stomach. Issei. But why do you want me to help you finish off Euclid? Do you have people in your ranks who surpass that fourth-rate northerner, whether by a little or a lot? He said, asked in a serious tone, thinking that they only came to screw him. Gabriel. For this, he said, making a hologram appear in the middle of the table and then reproducing it, revealing a Euclid who had the same power of darkness as Issei. Issei. That bastard, he said in an angry but also surprised tone, seeing how Euclid, apart from having that power, came accompanied by several identical or similar creatures. Who knew? We believe that Euclid got that power and those creatures thanks to the thing that came out of the portal that the former faction leaders made. We are not sure about the last thing, but it is a guess, she said in a somewhat serious tone, however her sight for a moment focused on the wedding ring that her former friend was wearing, making her sad. Issei. Do you know where it could be or what that thing is like? He said, asked in a serious tone, while Thor shook his head. Thor. No. Just as he appeared, he disappeared, leaving not a single trace of his power or anything like that to track him down, he said in a somewhat serious tone, while Issei sighed in an annoyed manner. Sarerg. We can finish these things, Issei, but the real problem is Euclid. In just 1 month he managed to conquer very important lands and bases, no one could defeat him. Even Adeland and Vali were lucky enough to confront him, he said in a serious tone, remembering how both celestial dragons could not defeat the Lucifuge, even though they even used their Diabolos dragon form. Sarerg. Issei, we wouldn't be here if we didn't need you, and I don't plan on using my title as a Mayu or the friendship we once had to get you to help us. Whatever your decision is, we will accept it, he said in a sincere and firm tone, something that Issei had noticed, remaining silent thinking about what decision to make, until he made it. Issei. Okay, I'll help you, he said in a confident tone, which made the current leaders happy. Issei. But my only target is going to be and is Euclid Lucifuge. He's still alive because of me, so I'll take care of finishing what I started. You guys will take care of that thing, is that clear? He said, asked in a serious tone, while Thor was going to get up, but Sarerg quickly stopped him. Sarerg. We accept your proposal, Issei. Thank you for listening to us, Issei, he said with a grateful tone, having a small smile on his face. Issei. You're welcome, but could you do me a favor, Sarerg? He said, asked in a somewhat serious tone, but also having other reasons for why he agreed to help them. Sarerg. Sure, what do you need? He said, asked with a somewhat intrigued tone and willing to fulfill that favor. Issei. I need you to rent an apartment in Kuo in my name, that's all. Sarerg. It won't be a problem, okay, we're leaving, Issei, he said, getting up, followed by the others, as was Issei. Without further ado, Issei accompanied the leaders and his parents until they left the Kamado house. Once outside, Gabriel made a portal leaving the place. Meanwhile, Issei proceeded to go to the courtyard of his house in search of his children, but upon arriving, he did not see Tanjiro or Nezuko anywhere. Issei. Tanjiro, Nezuko, where are they? He exclaimed, asked, looking around, trying to find his children with his eyes. Issei. Kids, whatever you're up to, you better stop, understood? He exclaimed, asked in a somewhat serious but worried tone, entering the forest in search of his children. The burgundy-haired boy looked everywhere in search of his children, but nothing, an enormous worry and despair slowly flooded him, and without wasting any time he began to run through the forest. Issei. Tanjiro, Nezuko, come out from wherever you are, he exclaimed worriedly, running through the forest. Issei continued running and shouting his children's names for a few minutes until he couldn't take it anymore, and he took out his wings of darkness and flew up. Once in the air, the burgundy-haired boy searched with total concern for his children, going from one side to the other through the forest. And after a while, he could finally see his children who were heading towards the house. Issei did not hesitate and went to where they were, although being close to them the burgundy-haired man undid his wings so that his children would not see them. Issei. Tanjiro, Nezuko, he exclaimed, running towards his children who just turned around, seeing their father who just hugged them. Issei. Are you okay? Nothing happened to you, right? He said worriedly, trying to find out if one of his children could be hurt. Tanjiro. We're fine too, San, don't worry, he said with a confident tone, while Issei sighed in relief. Issei. I'm glad to hear that, he said with a relieved tone, however the eldest Kamado gave his two sons a little slap in the face. Issei. Don't do that again, you heard me, I thought something bad had happened to you, he exclaimed in a scolding tone, while both brothers lowered their heads. Nezuko. We're sorry too, San, but it's all my, she didn't finish speaking because her brother interrupted her. Tanjiro. Nezuko didn't do anything. I accidentally threw the ball into the forest and went to look for it, but Nezuko followed me. It was all my fault, too, San, he said with a guilty tone looking at the ground, although the younger Kamado felt someone caressing his head. Issei. It's not your fault, Tanjiro, and neither are you, Nezuko. The fault falls on me for leaving them alone, since as their father it is my duty to take care of them and protect them, he said with a guilty tone, while stroking his children's heads. Issei. You are still children, so it is normal that you do or hear things that you will not understand now but in the future. Although I am leaving you with an enormous responsibility when it comes to taking care of your sister, Tanjiro, and I am sorry, he said, apologizing to his firstborn. Since he was exposing them to the danger of entering the forest and getting lost in addition to the animals that live there. Issei. So please could you forgive this intrepid and dwarf of a father you have? He said, asked in a soft tone, to which his children responded with a hug which brought a smile to his face. Tanjiro, Nezuko. We forgive you too, San, the brothers exclaimed, while Issei only gave each of them a kiss on the forehead. Issei. Thank you. But I want you both to promise me that you will never do this again, and I in return, I will promise that I will never leave you alone. What do you say? Tanjiro, Nezuko. Let's try not to do this again too, San, they both exclaimed in a firm tone, while Issei let out a small laugh. Issei. Good. Now let's go back home, help me pack some things since we're going on a trip to a place, he said, starting to walk, while his children were intrigued as to where they were going to go. Nezuko. Where to, Tusan? She said, asked, looking at her father, who remembered the good times he spent in Kuo. Issei. We will go to a city called Kuo, I have to help some people, so we will live there for a while, and then we will return, he said with a confident tone, while his children began to ask their father what that city was like. Issei. You'll know what it's like when we go, but first help me make dinner, and when we finish eating, we'll pack our things, he said with a small smile, receiving a hi from both children. Issei simply headed towards the Kamado house with his children, but as he walked the demon began to remember all the bad things he did, and even for a moment thought he was going to become that monster again. However, that thought had vanished the moment he felt his children's warm hands join his own. And without hurting them, Issei squeezed both children's hands a little as a sign that he would never leave them for any reason. Let me know in the comments below if you guys want the next part. Also check out my other video that has been shown and left. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like and share this video. And have a fantastic day. Bye.